It's true. It's just people do generally get to say, I'm this, but I'm here representing myself.
Good evening, everyone. A quorum of the City Council being present, I call tonight's meeting. Whoa. Reverberation. I call. Is somebody got a microphone on, maybe? That's. All right. The ones up here on? Oh, Jan, can you? Okay, that's a little better.
It's still bad.
Still happening. All right. Oh, well. All right. Looks like he's got it. Okay. As I was saying, a quorum of the City Council being present, I call tonight's meeting of April 1st, 2019 to order. Please rise if willing and able to salute the flag and pause for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight's meeting is being recorded with audio and visual devices, and there are hearing aids available for anyone who needs them. Before we go to public comment, a quick announcement. We will be recessing at 7:15 tonight for about 15 minutes. We are lighting up City Hall for autism awareness, and we are going to go down and quickly take part in a brief ceremony and flick the switch and light up City Hall. So we will, just so folks know that. I'm also asked that we move suspension of the rules to bring forward City Manager Agenda Item Number 1, and so that we can hear briefly from the great-great-nephew of Ms. Morgan, who is getting a street named after her because of her work on social and racial justice. So if for suspension, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. On bringing forward the City Manager Agenda Item Number 1, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. And it reads, communication transmitted from Louis A. D. Pasquale, City Manager, relative to a recommendation from City Engineer Catherine Watkins to eliminate and rename certain streets in the North Point Cambridge Crossing area. Mr. Spencer? There you are, sir. If you want to click the button, make sure the green light's on, and if you'd like to say a few words.
I would. Thank you so much. Mr. Mayor, City Council, my name is James Spencer. I am the great-great-nephew of Gertrude Wright Morgan, who you've chosen to name a street after. I wanted to let you know that the family is ecstatic over this honor that she is being given. She has an illustrious history. She's originally from Springfield, Illinois. She was the first woman to go to Springfield High and graduated third in her class. She came here to Cambridge. She was a suffragette. She married Clement Morgan, who was an intricate part of Cambridge politics back at the turn of the century. She was instrumental in the Niagara Movement, which was the precursor to the NAACP, and it did play a role in the formation of the NAACP. So we're very, very proud of her. I'd just like to read something to you before I leave. This is June 16th, 1877, Daily Illinois State Journal, the Springfield High graduation ceremony. Oh, I'm sorry. The Springfield High graduation ceremony. Miss Gertrude Wright then addressed the audience. The subject of her essay was Unknown Heroes, and the manner in which she handled it showed great care and preparation. These are her words. Heroes have always played an important part in history and fiction. We hear of the exploits of great generals and military geniuses, and from the number, each one singles out his hero. But the greatest of all heroes is the unknown hero, he who by some kind word or deed lessens or alleviates pain and suffering or does a friendly act is a hero who all should look upon with admiration. Truly they should receive a shining crown and be rewarded as an unknown hero. I'd like to thank Mr. Mayor and the City Council and the Historical Commission for making my aunt, who is an unknown hero, a known hero now. So my great appreciation and appreciation of my family.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you for what your family has done for the city over the years.
Thank you.
On adopting the three orders, the four orders, I'm sorry, all those in favor say, oh,
Are we not going to say anything about it?
do you want, okay, go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Councilor Simmons.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge Mr. Spence, who just spoke, and to talk a little bit about his family. And he said something that I thought was very important. He said someone who was unknown. And it's just so important, particularly in the area of this new neighborhood called North Point that's coming together, that the neighbors, the people that go through there, that visit there, that play in the park there, will have an opportunity to know one of two women, Harriet Jacobs, out in the hallway, but know these women and what they did. And they go from being unknown heroines to known heroines. You know, in the city, in these days and times where we hear so many bad, horrible things, or people that need to be represented are either underrepresented or not represented at all. This is an opportunity for Cambridge to shine, as we often do, to say that we are going to take two extraordinary, formidable women and take them out of the shadows and put them into the light. So this is an extraordinary opportunity. I'm glad that we're doing it. It's a very proud moment.
Thank you, Councilor. Any further comments? Again, I want to thank Cambridge Crossing and the Historical Commission, Divco West, for doing this. We had a reception in the parlor before the meeting, and Councilor Simmons brought up something which I didn't know about the New York Times reprinting obituaries of sort of unknown heroes whose obituaries were written hundreds of years ago, and as a way of bringing them back to modern times. And so as I'm looking at Mark Levy, and I don't know if anyone from the Chronicle is here, that might be something we might want to look into locally, and reprinting some obituaries of folks who have meant a lot to Cambridge and changed our city in a positive way, but who may have
Absolutely.
fallen out of sight of history because they're not in a textbook. So, Vice Mayor?
I think that's a great idea. I think, if I remember correctly, these were actually obituaries that were never run but should have been run, but because they were either female or people of color or whatever, not considered important enough for an obituary. So,
Mr. Mayor, the series was called Overlooked.
Great.
And it was the New York Times attempt in their 167-year run to bring forward people that they had either on purpose or accidentally overlooked.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. So on adoption of the 4 orders, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And the ayes have it. Thank you. There is no submission of the record. We now go to public comment. Public comment is the time in the meeting when the public can speak for up to 3 minutes on any issue on tonight's agenda, with the exception of awaiting reports and communications. We ask that to your left, you'll see a screen that will count down your 3 minutes. You will hear a bell, hopefully, at 15 seconds, which is your sort of indication that your time is running out, and then another bell when your time has expired. You'll also see the name of the next speaker so that that person can get ready. We ask that you address all your comments to the chair and not individual counselors. We ask that you please, if you have written comments, to leave them in the basket next to the podium. That makes it easier for our clerk. If your comments are in electronic form, there are business cards there. If you email them by midnight tonight, they will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. We also ask folks in the audience, when a speaker is speaking and after a speaker is done, to please refrain from clapping, snapping, booing, anything that might intimidate other people in the audience. We want to be a respectful place, and if you are the one person who has a different opinion than everyone else, we want you to feel, we don't want you to feel intimidated, so we ask for that courtesy. I think that is it. So we are going to go first to Kim Bernstein, followed by Sophia Bernstein. And please state your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on when you come to the podium. Sophia Bernstein, followed by Kim Bernstein. Speak right into the mic, otherwise.
It is. Sometimes it's.
Okay. My name is Sophia Bernstein, and my address is 146 Larch Road. So first I want to thank the Cambridge City Council for their support and enthusiasm for this project to celebrate the contribution of women from Cambridge and their role fighting for women's right to vote. When my mom told me there was another city council meeting to review the project, I was confused because I thought the meeting in June was the final approval, but now I know that it takes lots of people from different areas of expertise and lots of time to review the project. I really hope tonight you will decide to fund the project. Some people think that spending money on a statue or public art is a waste of money. Here are my thoughts on why it is money well spent. Symbols matter, especially to kids. When we see something, we ask our parents, "What is that?" If we don't see any statues of women in Cambridge, how can we learn about all of the important things they did to make Cambridge great? Last week, there was an article in the New York Times called "Where the Girls Aren't." It explained the impact of women not being represented in public art. There are so many statues of men, especially generals on horses, that people may believe that it is only men who made significant contributions to building our country or our city. New York is working to correct this gender gap and putting up 5 statues of women, all with amazing stories, plus a statue in Central Park to commemorate women's suffrage leaders. I'm so happy that Cambridge has realized we have the same gender gap here and is doing something significant to show in a concrete way that we value the women of Cambridge who helped to fight for their right to vote. I know that change takes time, but I hope you push to make this happen quickly. I hope we have a great celebration revealing the plans for the project in August 2020 for the 100th anniversary, and have the public art installed so that kids in Cambridge can ask their parents, who is this and what did she do? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to leave your comments in the basket so we can make sure we capture it perfectly? Thank you. Kim, followed by Saskia Van James.
All right, my name is Kim Bernstein from 146 Larch Road, commenting on the same public art project. Again, want to thank the City Council for all the work that has gone into reviewing this project and getting to the place of voting on a proposed budget. Sophia did a great job proposing some of the reasons why the project is so important. And I know the tougher question isn't whether or not it's important, but it's really talking about the money and the funding of it. And I really believe that Cambridge has a great opportunity with this project to be among leading cities to correct the gender gap in public art, and maybe more importantly, correcting the message about how it values the contributions of its citizens, regardless of their gender. Sophia and I are really proud to be honorary members of the Cambridge City 19th Amendment Centennial Committee. That's an impressive list of committee members from multiple areas of expertise that are going to really help ensure that Cambridge is going to do this art project in a meaningful way and bigger than just putting up a bronze statue of a woman in a park. In particular, we've enlisted Barbara Berenson, the author of Massachusetts in Women's Suffrage Movement, and Jane Kaminsky, the director of Harvard's Schlesinger Library, which is the home to renowned suffrage scholars and an incredible collection of original suffrage documents, including papers and memorabilia of women from Cambridge. Maybe there's info about his great aunt there. In our discussions with them, they're really interested in telling a richer narrative that includes the role of women in color, who are even more underrepresented, and how the suffrage movement impacts how we think about voting inclusion today. But in order for us to fully celebrate and to translate this rich history and commentary into a meaningful piece of art, we need generous funding. In a different New York Times article, which I'll also leave, from March 6th, it estimates that each of the statues in New York City will range between $300,000 to $1 million. So this isn't cheap. Cambridge seems committed to spending a lot of money on this project, and I really encourage you to fully fund it so we can do the project right. Thanks.
Thank you. Saskia Van James, followed by Marilee Meyer.
Good evening. The cannabis industry is a great opportunity as a step towards economic empowerment towards our most marginalized and the very communities that have been ripped apart from the war on drugs. How can we create an equitable solution to stem the damage our government has inflicted upon the most marginalized within our cities? I'm glad you asked. 1, a city ordinance establishing equitable regulation of the cannabis industry within the city of Cambridge, similar to what the MEEC, Marijuana Economic Empowerment Coalition, has proposed to the city of Boston. I've printed copies of this proposal, and I also propose for the city of Cambridge to work with the Marijuana Economic Empowerment Coalition. 2, an amendment to Section 4A. For the first 2 years from the effective date, the city shall issue a cannabis business permit only to priority applicants. Amend this to the first 10 years. The city of Cambridge has broken families, communities, and still has local constituents jailed, economically disenfranchised, and frankly mentally scarred to this very day. The systemic racism that was practiced through the war on drugs occurred for decades and continues. Marijuana use is roughly equal among black and white people, yet black people are 3.73 times more likely to be arrested for possession. Marijuana convictions result in a ban from collecting food stamps and eviction for public housing. At the minimum, the city of Cambridge owes its constituents 1 decade back. The city of Cambridge has a responsibility to its constituents to acknowledge this damage and create protective barriers to stem the damage that's been inflicted to those most marginalized and vulnerable among us. 3, an amendment to priority applicant, Group A priority applicants. Minority or woman-owned business as certified by the Commonwealth, to be amended to woman or minority-owned business that has lived within the city of Cambridge for a minimum of 5 years and income limit of $100K. We, the residents of Cambridge, are being pushed out. People who have lived here for generations can no longer afford to stay. It is not a coincidence that the very people who can no longer afford to stay here are also the most marginalized and face the most barriers to economic success through systemic racism and sexist practices. Let us never forget that poverty is created by design, and let's work together to change this for the future of our city and its residents. 4, shelf space for equity applicants. Retail dispensaries operating in the city of Cambridge should require 51% or more products sourced from equity certified applicants. I also ask for you to review the proposal given by Joe Gilmore to the City of Boston, co-founder of the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council, of which I have a copy. 5, advocacy. Use of city funds to support a pipeline to economic success. Local residents who have convictions will be offered training for employment to advocate to those most marginalized, including imprisoned, and informed of those of the economic opportunities that exist for them within the cannabis business industry. 6, designated use of public space. We must take into consideration those who live in public, affordable housing face very real implications on a federal level for entering into the cannabis industry. I propose development of hubs, local meetings for Group A applicants. 7, access to free legal counseling for Group A applicants. And 8, startup cost grants for Group A applicants. Thank you. My time is up. I am sorry for talking so fast, but
You already sent this to
Time.
us.
Thank you.
You've sent this through an email already today, right?
yes,
Yeah,
I did.
Okay.
Here's
Thank you.
copies.
Marilee Meyer, followed by Suzanne Blaye.
That's a hard act to follow. Hi, Marilee Meyer, and I'm speaking in support of PO number 3, the more clarification concerning the overlay. The well-intended envisioned plan included quality of life issues, but all the meetings that were hijacked by inclusionary and affordable housing narratives, and not one presentation was completed. To this day, no one really understands what the plan entails. Elements keep changing, and as recently as March 5th, we are introduced to the form-based code of number crunching. It is not as simple as either 45 feet or 80 feet proposed heights. FAR is eliminated, and new standardized dimensions can add 6 to 10 times density of current zoning as of right. It is not equitable that abutters and the planning board are reduced to non-binding advisory roles, that the final decision is by CDD and staff, and any design review may, quote, occur only at the discretion of the developer, unquote. This is rife for corruption and loopholes. You need to see scale models of what is being proposed, and you also need to remind MIT to house their students. We also need to know who is purchasing the buildings. We need the analysis of displacement and evictions, and affordable home ownership, et cetera. There's a lot of programs that we can still look at. These are all part of the discussion. Think about this. A longtime homeowner rents his upper floor to his uncle and cousin for the last 30 years. He dies, but his name is the only one on the deed, and the family doesn't have enough money to buy the building. A developer buys it, evicts the families, and sells the 3 floors for $1.2 million each. What would happen, I'm asking this, so what would happen if the city came up with a mortgage down payment for the 2 families with the potential of the 3rd renter? Would it be cheaper than the projected $300,000 to $500,000 per unit to build affordable housing? These are some of the financial implications needed to be explored. As it stands, the overlay ignores equity, and CDD is too shallow to take the deep dive to look into unintended consequences of this simplistic, one-size-fits-all special interest plan. We need a deeper look into the long-term viability of this important issue, and remember that generational residents count too. Thank you.
Marilee, could you please leave your comments in the basket? Suzanne Blaye, followed by Trudy Goodman.
Suzanne Blier, 5 Fuller Place. I wish to offer my support for policy order number 3 and thank those counselors who've brought it to your attention. There's far too little information and analysis that's made available to the public, and I think that this is an important part of that. I also would like to support expanding policy order 4 and 9. This is the public television version of the housing meetings by adding more information to a special website on the overlay. It keeps changing almost week by week, and we have too little data to go on as we're trying to, as residents of the city, address the various elements within it. I've sent you a letter on this. But specifically, I think there are a lot of critical questions that remain. We need to clarify what as of right means in the context of the overlay. We need a delineation of specifically those Cambridge cases in the last 10 years where affordable housing has not been supported and where there has been a suit. My understanding is it's not simply about neighbors not wanting others, but rather issues of more immediate concerns, such as who owns particular properties. We also need clarification of why the current system of the planning board design review is no longer considered valid and putting the design review under the sole direction of the city manager, whose focus is primarily on the economic stability of the city. We need more clarification on the proposed overlay rezoning and its impact on affordable housing. If, as I've understood, no new affordable housing is likely to emerge from it, why is the city not considering other things? In Harvard Square, we've got a parking garage that could easily be transformed, city-owned, into this. We also need to consider form-based zoning is really only used in 1% of the communities nationwide, and it's based on considerable study. And for it to work here and elsewhere, you really need to take the time, sometimes 5 to 8 years, to go into the neighborhood, the historic neighborhoods, see what they want to see as viable considerations in their design, consider at the same time green spaces to add, places for grocers and others. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think we need specific questions from the city on this, and putting this together in a viable format that we all can learn from, including letters from many of us on these various issues, would be important. Thank you.
Thank you. Trudy Goodman, followed by Carolyn Shipley.
Hi. I live Trudy Goodman. I live at 1221 Cambridge Street in Cambridge. I want to speak to 2 policy orders you have there. One is Policy 16, which is about the financing of low-income candidates to run for office, and also financial ceiling on campaign funds. I think it's extremely important. I don't know how it can be accomplished. It's been accomplished in other cities. Otherwise, the only people running for office are people who have money in their pockets or people who can approach different venues to get money. It creates a sort of, shall we say, unequal playing field when somebody has to maybe come up with $20,000 or $30,000 to run for office. And we're in a city right now where people are talking a lot about inclusionary, and that's pretty much about inclusionary as well. You want to include everybody in on the voting and democratic process. The other thing I want to speak to is Policy Order 7, which has to do with demarcation areas within crosswalks and within traffic zones. And we could certainly use that in Emmett Square. I live in a building that is filled with people on walkers and who are in wheelchairs and other devices that are used for assisting walking and mobility. Right now, as people know here, there's a huge problem in Inman Square about traffic. And let me just tell you about one of the guys who lives in my building, Charlie, how he almost got hit walking across the street on a walker by 2 cars going in 2 different directions. I think if we have a demarcation zone for that, it really helps people like Charlie. He really, really needs it. And it helps everybody else. We're hopefully all going to get older sooner or later, correct? I'm also here this evening wanting to know what's happening about the addendum to what's going on with the overlay as well. It continues to be an issue in every neighborhood in Cambridge, and I've come before the council mountains of times, and I'll just continue to say the same thing. We need to also take a look at who is developing, how they're developing, and see what other properties they've already developed. Take a walk into my building, take a walk into any other building that's been developed. Take a really good look around before you allow these people to build again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Carolyn Shipley, followed by Heather Hoffman.
Good evening, Carolyn Shipley, 15 Laurel Street. I wanted to speak to policy orders 3, 4, and 9, and I hope that the council will approve them this evening. On number 3, because too little information and analysis can be found in the affordable housing overlay documents, it is very difficult to discern what the authors of the reports had in mind. No drawings, no graphics, no dimensions, no examples have been described that show what some developments might look like on a street like mine, for instance. Also, almost no definitions of the terminology used in the documents is offered. The city has not published their definition of as-right development. The city has not explained how this will take away one's right to appeal and basically freedom of speech. We know what inclusionary housing is. We have seen examples of inclusionary zoning, but we do not have a vision of what affordable housing with this proposed overlay zoning would look like. And it seems that open space can be reduced to almost nothing because of all the exceptions in draft number 2. And although some claim that increasing density will reduce carbon emissions, this lack of guaranteed open space will mean fewer trees that the trees could reduce carbon emissions. On policy order 4 and 9, thanks to Councillor Simmons for both of them. They're very important policy orders because they're about access. Important because not everyone can attend meetings in City Hall. Important because there hasn't been any written documentation of the discussions of the past 3 affordable housing overlay meetings. Indeed, the availability of the video recordings has been helpful. However, I learned today that the closed captioning does not work. Upon inquiring about the non-functioning closed caption, I was told that it hasn't worked for over a year. Does it take that long to make closed captioning functional? Why has this problem not been addressed in a timely manner by the city manager or city council? I haven't checked, but would this lack of closed captioning be a violation of the ADA? Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Hoffman, followed by Charles Franklin.
Hello, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. And I want to thank Trudy Goodman for saving me a whole bunch of time, what she said. And now I want to talk about the overlay, which I haven't talked about much. And that's because I tend to put my energy into things that either affect my neighborhood or most people aren't interested in because someone's got to talk about them. And I want to talk about how we got here. I think that a huge reason for the outcry from so many people is that people do not trust city government to look out for them. And so they are suspicious of what comes from city government. And in fact, city government has proven itself all too equally suspicious of anything that comes from us, the residents. And it's a lousy situation. And it creates problems that we shouldn't have. Now, I've been reading a book called People Before Highways by Carolyn Crockett, and it's about the fight against the Inner Belt, the Southwest Expressway, the never-built Interstate 695, etc. And I found a quote in here from an interview with Fred Salvucci that I thought was really useful. So ignore the names. I'm not going to tell you who these people are. We were meeting in Dennis Blackett's living room as we usually did to plot the next step. Bob Goodman came in very excited, carrying, I think, in his hand a magazine article called Advocacy and Planning by a city planner who invented the term advocacy planning. Goodman said, "Look at this guy. He's got this theory that the traditional view of planning is there's God and the planner talks to God. God tells the planner the plan, then the planner draws the plan. And there's like one plan and that's what we do." This guy's saying that's not the way it works at all. Plans represent interests. The planners tend to represent the powerful interests. That's why we get screwed up cities, that there really are different interests involved. And it should be the role of planners to work as advocates, just as lawyers do, for low-income communities so that they have at least some voice in this discussion. And Goodman said, that's us. We're advocacy planning. He's given us a name. We've been doing it for the past year. So it was kind of a very exciting moment. And then the author goes on, Salvucci identifies this aha moment as the group's formal turning point. Bob Goodman's discovery of Paul Davidoff's field-busting 1965 article, Advocacy and Pluralism in Planning, gave the committee's founders an expanded framework for articulating their work. Davidoff's attack on traditional planning approaches laid bare the field's professional practice of reproducing the interests of the powerful at the expense of the needs of local citizens.
Thank you, Heather. Charles Franklin, followed by Hassan Rashid.
Charles Franklin, 162 Hampshire Street. So much to talk about, not enough time. All right. So, first, symbols are very important. That's why I'm happy that we are doing more to have symbols for our women. And I'm still really hoping we're going to get our Harriet Tubman 20s. I'm still excited for that. I'm glad we're also going to be giving priority to those who were damaged by the war on drugs. And if anyone has any doubt about why the war on drugs existed, I'm going to read a quote from Richard Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Elrickman. "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities." So if there was any doubt, I think that makes it pretty clear. So thank you for helping to rectify this. Second, in terms of the report on limiting donations from outside the Commonwealth, I could never support this. Also, full disclosure, I am running for city council. It would have been impossible to get my campaign off the ground without donations from my friends and family who largely live out of state. So unless there's public funding for everyone, I don't think that that would be fair. Second, I'm glad, oh, not second, whatever number this is, I'm glad the city is planting more trees in my neighborhood. I want to make sure that they get watered. Last year, trees all up down the street had dry water bags for weeks. So they're going to die if you don't do that. Second, I'm disappointed with the result showing that we have enough trash cans in the port. Yes, there are trash cans in the parks, but most people are not like me and will not walk across the street to put trash in the trash can. So we need more down the street. We're definitely going to vote for that environment bill in the State House. So that's good. And last but not least, on the affordable housing overlay, we definitely need some more data on this. The numbers keep on changing from week to week. Before it was 15% open space, now it's 30%, but with exceptions. How do we know that 30% is not going to allow us to reach our goals? If we can have 30% across the board, that will have a huge benefit for quality of life. So we need to have that research. And I don't know how much effort it would take, hopefully not that much, but it would be nice to see some. And as many of you know, I have my own affordable housing overlay plan, which has 8 zones instead of 2, which I think will help better for quality of life and so that people can feel like they belong to part of the neighborhood. And I think that's very important. I don't have the money to have that research done myself, but I encourage the city to take a look at my plan and give it some serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Hassan Rashid?
Peace be unto you. Hello, everybody. I'm Hassan Rashid. I reside at 820 Massachusetts Avenue. My public comment is concerning City Manager's Agenda Item Number 17, Calendar Charter Rights Item Number 1, and Policy Order Resolution List Item Number 349, and any other agenda item that directly or indirectly relates to homelessness. In undertaking steps to impose and access the revenue from the excess and community impact fees, it has become a fact that you municipal policymakers and administrators has skipped important steps in regards to being more specific in how these community impact fees will be utilized. There's nothing thus far included in your work that clearly codifies the inclusion of the homeless sector and Mosaic in the distribution of impact revenue streams, impact revenue streams, etc. Full homelessness stakeholders' engagement is crucial to the works. All the future tools and strategies to accelerate this process must ensure the city's success is sustained by deliberately producing pathways primarily for the homeless to benefit and prosper from these proposed impact fees. The designation, construction, and development of homeless housing initiative must also be specified and included in these impact fees wealth building opportunity efforts. And unequal growth is not only unjust, it is socially and economically unsustainable, and also an exclusion of the homeless who've long been left behind. Participation in the distribution of impact fees will help to provide the homeless with the opportunities and resources they need to thrive. Don't become guilty of underinvesting in your homeless citizens and residents, systematically shutting them out as recipients of wealth-building opportunities that will help them to thrive and reach their full potential. In conclusion, the local and regional homeless Mosaic sector should become equal partners in creating innovative community solutions and not become a local economic banded citizen and residential entity. Thank you. Yours.
Thank you. So that is the end of folks who signed up. James raises his hand. If there's anyone else who did not sign up who would like to speak on a topic, James, come on up. Just raise your hand and I will call you. Again, please state your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on.
Thank you. James Williamson, 1000 Jackson Place. I'm glad to hear the name Pred Salvucci mentioned as I was walking in. I just came from a walk tour that he led and a meeting about some other issues. I want to speak, first of all, to the policy order number 5, which I was really encouraged when I saw the headline of it, and then I was shocked when I read what apparently had prompted it, which was a bike-on-bike collision that involved somebody being killed in Lexington a few days ago. Some of you will know, or hopefully will know, or remember that I have been begging people who work for the city of Cambridge for 11 years to do something about this situation in the Cambridge piece of this network of paths out by Russell Fieldhouse and the rear entrance to the LYFT. I've had meetings with city staff. I've brought it up with city councilors. Can we please do something to get the people who race their bicycles through this very heavily congested area in the area that I hope you understand where I'm talking about, Russell Fieldhouse, coming off Ringe Ave by Como Field, and then from the other side coming in from Linear Park, Whittemore Ave, and that piece that comes from behind the football field, and then converge and to the LYFT. Now, people just race through there all day long on their bicycles, especially when it's a commuting time, with no consideration. And now we learn that there was a bike-on-bike collision further out in Lexington. We don't know exactly how it happened. But if you read the article yesterday in the Boston Globe, you will, the reporter went out and interviewed people, and one of the comments was, the more crowded the bikeway, and it's referred to as a bikeway. One of the first things that I've been recommending for years, and I've just sent stuff to the city manager, is clarify for people that it is not an exclusive bikeway. It is a shared path. And yet the signage is confusing and reinforces the idea that some bicyclists have that it's their raceway. It's because it's directional. It's sort of the Minuteman Bikeway, because it is an overlay of the Minuteman Bike Trail over a shared path in the area that I'm talking about. And the signage says Minuteman Bike Trail this way. So it sort of reinforces the idea that it's really for us bicyclists, and you guys are just in our way. And that's one thing that I've been recommending could be clarified, among others. So the person interviewed said, people go so fast down here. That's the biggest issue, because it's a mixed-use trail and not just a bike path. I think that is definitely worrisome when bikers are using it at a really fast pace. Over a year and a half ago, I had a meeting out there with city staff, and the city manager came out. And I invited another senior person from another department. We had a meeting a year and a half ago on this issue. We walked around there. The city manager was nearly run over by a bicyclist. I was optimistic that something was going to happen. Nothing has happened in a year and a half. I commend you for bringing these issues forward, and I'd like the public to be involved.
Thank you, James. Peter?
Peter Valentine, 37 Brookline Street. The fact is, life depends on things of value. Things of value will prevail, and the United States of America is invincible. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else who has not spoken who would like to speak on an issue on tonight's agenda? Okay, seeing no one, on a motion by the Vice Mayor to close public comment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and public comment is closed. There are no reconsiderations. We move to the city manager's agenda on a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring the city manager's agenda before us for discussion and adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Councilor Siddiqui.
I'd like to pull number 19, please.
Number 2 and number 13, please.
Denise. Councilor Simmons. 13. Pleasure. 2 and 13.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Councilor Zondervan.
3 and 4, please.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
16, please.
Mr. Mayor.
One second. 16. Councilor Mallon.
Number 6, please.
Councilor Carlone.
Thank you. Number 12, please.
Vice Mayor.
Mr. Mayor? Sorry.
Mr. Mayor?
15 and 18, please.
Councilor Kelly.
Number 17, please.
Okay. I'd like to pull 7 and 14, just for a quick thank you. Anything else?
Could you go over what was pulled
I'm sorry?
Could you go over what was pulled again,
Yes.
please?
So Councilor Simmons pulled at number 2. Councilor Zondervan pulled number 3 and 4. Councilor Mallon pulled 6. I pulled number 7. Councilor Carlone pulled 12. Councilor Simmons pulled 13. I pulled 14. Vice Mayor pulled 15. Councilor Toomey pulled 16. Councilor Kelly pulled 17. Vice Mayor pulled 18. And Councilor Siddiqui pulled 19. On the balance, roll call.
On the consent agenda items, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Councilor Kelly. Councilor Mallon.
Yes.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Councilor Toomey. Councilor Zondervan. Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the consent agenda items are adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
Okay, we now move back to City Manager Agenda Item Number 2, a communication transmitted from Louis A. D. Pasquale, City Manager, relative to a waiting report item number 19-19 regarding a report on new tree plantings and trash receptacles in the port. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. DePasquale, Mr. O'Riordan, and Ms. Peterson. I want to thank Mr. O'Riordan for his response to the trash receptacles and the tree plantings, which was a response to an order that was offered by myself and Councillor Mallon. I don't fully understand it, but I do understand it. So I get the gist is we're going to be doing a lot of work relative to sidewalk improvements. And so because we're doing that in that context, we're going to think about tree plantings and where they can go and some extra special places and where we can put more where it is appropriate. So I kind of get that, and I think I'm okay with that. What I wasn't quite clear about was the pot bellies, I think they're called, and the Big Bellies and the Victor Stanley trash receptacles. So I don't have I don't know what a Victor Stanley trash receptacle looks like. I'm sure when you tell me, I will know. My concern is two things I think I pulled from this is one, we're wondering if pot bellies are really good because they're being underutilized, and then we do have some I can put my glasses on, Victor Stanleys, and, so are they really being used well? Well, I would say let's not remove them because they're underutilized, number one. Number two, or if you're going to take them away, maybe replace them with, I know in other parts of the city there are receptacles that use your foot. Now, the reason why I like I want to say pot bellies, Big Bellies, is because it gives it's a signal that's sent back to you that says this is full. With some of the other trash receptacles, which it may be the Victor Stanley, particularly in the summertime, they get overutilized, and if you don't call, no one knows they're overutilized, number one, if the Victor Stanleys are the ones that I think they are. And with some of the receptacles, debris goes behind the trash can. The DPW can't pick up the receptacle itself, only the liner, I'm going to say. And so debris gets in there. Summertime, it starts to mold and mildew, and it's just nothing nice. So I would strongly encourage you not to take out any pot bellies. Let's find other ways to or use citizen-friendly receptacles. Again, maybe the one that operates with the foot, because personally I like the pot bellies because it reports back. I don't like putting my hands on them. So it's sort of a catch-22. With the open mouth ones, you don't have to put your hand on anything, but then there's no one to respond to it when it's full. For the other ones, it responds to when it's full, but not everybody wants to touch it unless they have a handkerchief or something, because sometimes they get a little icky, for lack of a better word. So I appreciate your response back. I really feel the need to press or push back to say we don't need less, we need more. And then around the amount of street improvements that you're doing, just so I'm sure, is that in relationship to the huge water sewer project you're doing? And if so, I hope that you'll continue doing the community meetings. I know they were happening pretty regular. I don't know if they're still. I know there were some meetings that were a part of the sewer treatment that engaged people around public art and some of the amenities that were going to come back to the community. But it's very easy to not go back to the community because maybe the interest seems to fall off or whatever. But I want us to make sure we keep up that level of intensity so we're reaching out. So my big issue is, or my big concern or question is, first explain to me what the Victor Stanleys are, and then second, if you're not going to use pot bellies, Big Bellies, I am so sorry, Big Bellies, can we make sure that there is some receptacle? I don't think it's a good idea to remove them because it appears that they're underutilized.
Mr. O'Riordan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, let me apologize first. I should have included images with this report back to you. And so the Victor Stanleys are the old traditional open-topped receptacles that we have used traditionally across the city in terms of receiving trash in communities. And slowly but surely we're replacing those with the Big Belly facilities, and we're replacing them with twin Big Bellies at this point in time. One side is the recycling side and the other is the trash receptacle. That both has a compactor and also has the ability to indicate when the trash receptacle is 50% full, 75% full, and so on. And that reports back to Public Works, thereby allowing us to empty those before they become overflowing, or they overflow with trash. I would also tell you that the latest versions of Big Belly receptacles have foot pedals. And so that's obviously, and that's been a significant concern in the community since we've begun to deploy Big Bellies. And so our expectation is that we will have those with foot pedals in place as we move forward. I think the only reason that I indicated that we would look at the extent to which the existing Big Bellies in the community are being utilised or underutilised is that there are some circumstances in the community at large where we have found that it may be a question of just relocating them across the street or wherever where we find that the trash issues are that much more egregious. And so we're certainly not intending to reduce the number of Big Bellies in the community. Though I do think that we try and keep them in the commercial areas or adjacent to stores or where, people are inclined to have create more trash issues. So that's part one in terms of the response to you. When it comes to the next construction, so there's an ongoing construction project that somewhat disappears, given the fact that it's a lot of it is immediately adjacent to the Mass and Main large building that's ongoing, and so that's a project that's been ongoing for the last 7 or 8 months and will continue for the next 12 months. Once that project is complete, or indeed before it's complete, we will begin a more significant community process in the neighbourhood, speaking about the redesign of all of the utility work that's going to happen there, as well as the redesign of the streets and those significant underground storage systems that we're going to put in place so as to further protect the community from flooding and so on. And so you can be assured that that's going to be a comprehensive program managed by the city engineer moving forward. It won't begin to occur until we get closer to a construction start line, so that we're not going to have that gap between decisions that the community make and when the project begins, and yet give people enough time to be able to fully consider all of the various options in front of them. So that will happen, I would say, maybe a year, starting about a year from now or a little bit after that. But you can be assured that that'll be a significant community process. And again, our expectation is that we will be looking at the surface infrastructure as part of that, streets, sidewalks, trees, Big Bellies and other furniture in that area as well.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Reardon. So I appreciate that. A couple of things I just want to caution you. I understand you're saying we're going to, because Mass and Main, or whatever it's called, is going to take a little while before you start another one, before you start the major water project. So there may be a lag in community engagement. I would say let's not be too big a lag, because if you're getting ready to start, let's just say for purposes of conversation, in March, or let's meet with people in February, they're going to feel as though they've been underinformed. So I would insert at least 2 community meetings in the middle at all, and I think you're pretty good at this, so I'm going to reiterate it, at all the outdoor public engagement opportunities that we have in the port. Have a table, have a flyer that goes out to let people know. Just want you to know that this is coming up, so that they can be as informed as possible. Because oftentimes when you'll tell people things, or they've gone to a meeting, too much time goes by, they forget, and then they feel as though they're underinformed, and they have other things on their mind until you dig up the ground. They can't go down the street anymore. So I would just say, find as many reasons or opportunities that either you run the meeting or you go to a meeting and say, and just by the way, while you're doing blah, we want you to know that we're going to be doing this and what these improvements are going to mean to the neighborhood. And about the trash receptacles, again, my concern was that we were going to have fewer, that was the tone that I took from the letter, that we were going to have fewer, and I didn't want see that happen. And then lastly, about the tree plantings. When you say tree plantings, you don't mean just trees, but looking at the I don't know what else to call them. On the corner of Hampshire and Windsor, there's not a tree there, but it's a bump out, and it's always looking under cared for. Now, you may not want to plant a tree there, but it would be a great opportunity to make some nice public plantings. Because again, a neighborhood that looks cared for is the one that's going to have less crime and less bad behavior. And so it's because it just says tree plantings. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about those bump outs that may not have a tree in them, but also need to have the same level of care as you would if you were to plant a tree. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mallon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Commissioner O'Riordan. I had a couple of questions on this. So the 27 new street trees, are these going to be planted in currently empty tree wells? Through you, Mr. Mayor, the majority will be planted in existing tree wells, yes. So do we have any idea how many empty tree wells there are in the Port neighborhood? Is it 27? Is it more than that? Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, I can't tell you at this point in time as to how many empty tree wells there are in the neighborhood. Again, I would say that we are staying away from the area where the construction is going to be most pronounced, given the fact that there may be disruption in those areas. And I would say that I would guess that there are certainly more than 27 in the Port area, but I can't give you a number. Okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of when those 27 trees are planted, if that will be, a lot of the neighborhood, a little bit of the neighborhood. I know that we're staying away from where the construction is because there'll be additional reconstruction and tree plantings at that point. But I was walking around the Port neighborhood on Saturday morning, and it seems like there's a lot of empty tree wells, and 27 probably wouldn't fill them all. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would agree that 27 won't fill them all, Councillor. I can get back to you with a more detailed response in terms of the number of existing empty tree wells there. Okay, I would just push back a little bit on this number and see if there was anything additional that we could do for those empty tree wells in the Port for this summer. As Councillor Simmons mentioned, the reason this came up was we were at a Safe Streets meeting talking about the Port in the summertime and things that we could be doing to kind of make sure that the neighborhood feels cared for, and trees are one of those ways that we can do that, and we've been talking a lot about trees here in this chamber. I'm just going to push back a little bit on that number and see if there's any way we can increase it. And then the other thing that I noticed this weekend was, so it says on the corner of Columbia and Broadway, there's one Victor Stanley and one recycling container. And on Columbia and Harvard, there's just the one Victor Stanley. They're both outside convenience stores, and I noticed that a lot of the trash that's in the Victor Stanley is actually bottles, like empty bottles. Just wondering if there's a way to add one of those blue recycling containers to the Victor Stanley on that particular corner. Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly we can look at that, Councillor. Okay, great. I know that those big bellies are very expensive, and deploying them has been hard to find funding for. So I appreciate just in the short term maybe doing that thing. All right, thank you.
Councillor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I'd like to thank the manager and Mr. Reardon for this response, and my colleagues for asking for more trees. I certainly want to jump on that bandwagon. 27 is great, and we need a lot more than that. I'm also certain that some of those at least are replacements for trees that didn't make it. So again, we want to be increasing the tree canopy significantly. This is an environmental justice issue in the Port, and we really need to do more than we have done. I will say that I am in favor of pot bellies and big bellies too. I am disappointed though, because back in September we put in a policy order on the Paulillo tot lot, and we didn't get a response. It's not listed on this response. We've seen no attention being paid to that particular open space in the Port. So I really hope that we can do something there.
Mr. Manager? Mr. Reardon?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Council, we'll look and get a response back to you on that in the near future.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I would like to move this response to the Neighborhood Long-Term Planning Committee to have a hearing on how we can do more for open space, tree canopy in the board.
Okay. I have the Vice Mayor, Councillor Kelly, and then we'll go back around to...
Okay. Am I on? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. On the refilling existing tree wells, so when we do that, that's outside of reconstructing the whole sidewalk where we would have to be following the new tree planting specs and using structural soil and all that kind of stuff. Do we have a sense of whether when we refill existing tree wells that have been empty for a while, whether these trees are going to survive, or if that's... Because I think we learned something through the process with the Committee on Public Planting, and we're learning more through the Urban Forest, Master Plan Task Force, that the way that we plant the trees is really important. So I know we really want to fill up existing tree wells, and we should, but I'm hoping that they'll be filled in a way that the trees have a fighting chance.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor, I think that while filling the existing tree wells, we're making them bigger. We're also amending the soil at this point in time. We're not putting in the volume that has recently been suggested, and that's something that we continue to think about because it is an enormous number in terms of the level of soil removal and replacement. We've also included in the most recent contract 3 years of watering. Which is significant at this point in time. Previously, it was initially started off as 6 months, then went to 2 years, and now we're at 3 years of watering. And again, that is being managed through the cartograph system, which is an internal-looking system at the moment, but our expectation is within a year that there'll be a front face on that so that everyone can see the extent to which trees are being watered or not. And so I think that as we move through the master planning process, or indeed through the various processes that have occurred with the Public Planting Committee and with the City Arborist and the Superintendent of Forestry over the last couple of years, that the conditions associated with these trees is improving all the time. I think the other thing we want to begin to look at, and we've begun to approach this, is whether or not larger or smaller trees are more appropriate in terms of just the ability of the tree to adapt to the surrounding soil conditions, which we know in many parts of the city are not good. And whether or not a bare root tree is actually a tree that may provide more success in the long term, though in the short term it doesn't look as successful. And so we're trying to grapple with all of these various issues at the moment, but I do think in terms of the planting conditions and the immediate care over the first 3 years plus of the tree's life, that there are significant improvements that are occurring in terms, and significant investments at this point in time that are being made in terms of those trees.
Thank you. Yeah, the watering is really important, and I'm glad that there will be the front-facing ability to sort of check. Two additional thoughts. This would be a great time to do some targeted promotion of both the Adopt a Tree program in this neighborhood and also the back of sidewalk tree planting program. Maybe there are some property owners in the port who have a little bit of space in the front yard and don't know about this, and we could get some additional trees in those front yards that would help. Thank you.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the manager and staff. It's not in the report, and I wouldn't be the first to bring it up, but people did mention moving water as part of this project. So I decided I would take this opportunity to allow you to explain repeatedly the flooding challenges we face, because it seems that people just don't understand how flat the city is and how moving water around can be such a challenge, and how flooding can be a real issue they should be thinking about.
Sure, Reardon.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the port area is an area that is particularly challenged when it comes to flooding issues and backup issues. And we are in the process of constructing a significant amount of underground storage systems so as to somewhat alleviate that flooding. But we cannot build our way out of the flooding problems that exist in the community. And it continues to exercise us at the Department of Public Works as to how best to have people protect themselves from circumstances associated with flooding. In 2010, in East Cambridge and in the port area, we had in excess of 165 properties in those neighbourhoods that were impacted by flooding during a 1-hour storm event where 3.8 inches of rain fell. People estimated that between $30,000 and $60,000 worth of damage was done to each of those properties during that event. And so, you know, as we continue to think about how best to alert people to this, we at Public Works continue to advise people when they're doing renovations to their homes that they are in vulnerable areas and that there are things that they should and shouldn't do with respect to those improvements. And we think that it's important that people continue to be cautious in terms of the improvements they're making to their basements and to their homes in these neighbourhoods. Thank you.
Anyone else? I have a quick comment. Councillor Simmons.
The only thing I wanted to add, to go back to the earlier discussion around community engagement, was the education aspect. People in the port, as a neighbor of the port, we have various concerns, and they go from crime to the tree canopy and environment and a number of other things. And so it's important for us to be wise about how we do our engagement in such a way we're bringing people along that wouldn't necessarily, you know, on the top of their list of 10 things, the tree isn't at the top, or the environment or anything of that nature. So how do we come up with very different ways of bringing people along? I mean, we talked about water back up, which wasn't before us, but you didn't suspend the rules to bring it up, is what I'm trying to say. But while it's in front of us, these are things that people are concerned about, but they have to be brought along. And we don't do that well enough. And so when we have meetings where we talk about important things like the environment or even planting trees, you don't see certain aspects of people because we don't do a good enough job reaching out to them. But we legislate what they can do, but we don't stretch our hand or arm out long enough to make sure we're engaging them. And so they can't. It's wonderful to have a program around adopting a tree, because I know we've done it several years. I adopted one summer, but it failed pretty much because people just didn't have the interest in it, and we never went to find out really why that happened. And I think it's because in the long list of things that people may be doing, not just in the port, but in certain neighborhoods, well, that's important and they want to see it go forward and prosper, it's not at the top of the list. So how do we find ways to engage people in a respectful, healthy, and dynamic way so that they work with us, so that if we plant, whether it's 27 or 54 trees, people will be looking out for it because they now understand that it needs not only the city to do it, but for them to participate in ways that they can participate, those kinds of things. And I think that often gets lost in the conversation, and that's why we see such a one-sidedness around some issues, because we just leave certain people out of the conversation altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple quick things from me. I think you heard from folks about the trash cans, and it's great that we have them in parks, but maybe in some other places as well. But the other part is, and this I think should be a citywide campaign, if you will. I remember a couple of years ago, when DPW put a new trash barrel out in front of Pearl Street Market on Pearl and Williams, I think it is, and I was working at Far Academy at the time. And I remember it was like the second day that it was there, and I watched someone come out of Pearl Street Market, unwrap whatever they were eating, barrels right there, and they just tossed their stuff on the ground. So we could, yes, we need more barrels, but we also need to educate people about where that litter goes, how it impacts the environment, and really encourage people to actually use the barrels that we're putting out there. Question about trees. A couple of years ago, there was a participatory budgeting to plant 100 new trees. Was that specifically for the port? Why am I thinking that? I could be wrong, but something in my head is saying it was 100 new trees in the port.
Mr. Mayor, I think there were 100 new trees to be planted to include the port neighbourhood, but I think it wasn't exclusively the port neighbourhood, and so there were trees as part of that effort planted in the port. And again, it was also explicitly stated that they shouldn't be in existing tree wells, but rather in new tree wells. And so I believe that project is now complete and they've been planted, but it wasn't exclusively in the port.
Okay, thank you. On placing the matter on file, all those in favor say aye.
Mr.
Oh,
Mayor?
no, sorry. Councillor Zonovan wants to refer this to
Neighborhood long-term planning.
Neighborhood and long-term planning on referral. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 3, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $300,000 from free cash to the Public Investment Fund Public Works Extraordinary Expenditures Account, which will support the expansion of the curbside organics program to 13-plus unit households in fiscal year 20 and be used for the purchase of collection bins and outreach efforts. Councillor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, thank you to the city manager and staff for this great initiative. We've been hearing from a lot of our residents that they would like to participate, so I'm excited that they will get the opportunity. Could you say a little bit about what challenges you're anticipating in this as part of this expansion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. So I think this is somewhat different to what we've done up to now in terms of having the curbside organics program available to residents throughout the city in properties up to 12 units. As we move beyond that to 13 plus units, it becomes more challenging from a logistical perspective to identify locations where people can store for the week, compost as it's our organic material as it's generated, and then making sure that we can make sure that it's not too heavy to be brought out to the curb, and that it can be brought to the curb in a barrel that is 95 gallons or less in size. Once you get over that, you're talking about something that's much heavier to both for the residents or for the property manager, and indeed for the residents to manage. And so our expectation is that this is going to be a staggered rollout in terms of 13 plus units, because I do think that there may be individual circumstances that may need to be dealt with in unique ways. And so we expect to begin to engage with that community and with property managers in these larger buildings over the next period of time, so that we understand as to how best we can work with them so as to facilitate significant uptake of this opportunity in the community. So I expect that we'll be working through the various properties all through the fall, winter, and spring of next year in terms of this rollout, and this appropriation allows for that.
Thank you. And this will ultimately still leave out some of our residents who are in public housing or who live in buildings that have their own waste management services. So can you speak a little bit about how we get to those folks as well?
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, As things stand, we have recycling in a number of the public housing facilities across the city, not all of them. Some of them are managed privately. About half of them are managed through the Department of Public Works. And we continue to work with CHA in terms of improving that service and improving the quality of the material that's given to the city as well. And so over time, our expectation is that we'll continue to work with CHA so as to make this offering available to people in those facilities. But again, there are much larger facilities and the challenges are unique in terms of the scale of those projects and whether or not they can be accommodated with the existing infrastructure that we have available to us in terms of trucks and so on. And so that may be a longer range effort given the size of those buildings. Similarly, with regard to buildings in the city that we service for recycling but don't service for trash. Again, it's the scale of those buildings that is challenging in terms of making sure that our trucks, our facilities can pick those up. And it may be a different model that we may need to look at in the long term as we begin to move beyond the 13 plus that are presently served for trash and recycling by the city.
Thank you. And through you, I know for recycling, we require it at least for commercial properties that have more than a certain amount of recyclable material. Would it make sense for us in the longer term to require food waste compost pickup even from private haulers for buildings that are not serviced by the city?
You know, I think, Councillor, that's something that we'll contemplate over the next number of years. I think in the immediate future, our focus is on the, excuse me, the 13 plus that we presently serve in terms of trash and recycling. I think it's a more, as you get to those very large buildings, it becomes a much more significant logistical challenge. And so that's something that we're beginning to think about at this point in time. But it's something that certainly we should be looking at over the next number of years.
Great, thank you. I do want to encourage you to continue thinking about how we can expand this program because it does bring a lot of benefits also to the residents in terms of hygiene and reducing rodent activities, and so really appreciate this expansion. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Dever.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's exciting. I'm sure a lot of residents of those buildings will want to know. So in terms of buildings that we do recycling, but they do their own trash. So there are a lot of sort of medium-sized brick buildings, many of them condos, the old Harlow buildings, that may have 20 or 25 units. Is that a category where it would probably be rolled out? But then, say, a building like the Atmark with 429 units, it probably wouldn't be right away? Is that what we're getting at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's exactly right, Councillor. Up to 25 units is something that we expect to be able to accommodate. It's when you get beyond that, it becomes more challenging in terms of just how best to facilitate it in a sanitary way and then how best to pick it up in a way that works for the trucking operations that presently exist in the city. And again, it may ultimately end up being something that we do with a private hauler as we expand beyond this, but that comes at a cost as well.
It might be good. I think we have a Health and Environment Committee meeting on April 23rd where we're going to discuss the Year Zero Waste Master Plan. It might be good to have a little more, slightly more detailed information about various sizes of buildings, because I'm sure residents are going to start asking us, is my building going to get it, whatever. The other question I had is, so this is obviously going to increase the volume of the organics we're collecting. Are we still doing it the same way, taking it to Charlestown to waste management and then having it turned into slurry to go up to the Greater Lawrence Sanitary District, or is there a new place where this is having to go?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, it continues to be something that we expect to bring to Charlestown at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Siddiqui.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to bring that up. I think there's supposed to be a part 2 on that conversation. Someone brought it up to me over the weekend. They gave me this garbage. They told me about garbage2garden.org. I don't know. Have you heard of it? I'll give this to you. I brought it for you. But I think it speaks to some of the things these private companies are doing And it may be important to have this conversation there because we're still going to get those questions even as we expand this program. Thank you.
Councilor Carlin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I live in an apartment building with 25 units, and I tried to convince you that it was 13 and 12 because it's an L-shaped building, but you didn't go for it. So I was going to bring up what the Vice Mayor brought up, that would be the logical size. Great. People have been pressuring me, so I know you'll come through. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Roll call.
Council Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
Yes.
Council Simmons.
Yes.
Council Toomey. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 3 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
Now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 4, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $180,000 in virtual net metering VNM credits to the General Fund Public Works Other Ordinary Maintenance Account for costs related to solar VNM agreements. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, and thank you for this great program as well. And thank you for answering some of my questions. I still had a few questions about this program because I didn't quite understand. I understand that we are trying to get 5% of our consumption from our own solar systems, and that we've already exceeded that, so we're at 7%. So I understood that, but this particular appropriation is for buying credits from solar systems that are not owned and operated by the City of Cambridge. So what percentage of our consumption do we get from those systems?
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, so this is an investment opportunity from our perspective, taking advantage of federal grants that have been available associated with installing PV systems on properties across the state. And perhaps maybe I'm best handing you over to Ellen, who can give you more details in terms of how it operates.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor, virtual net metering agreements are not directly related to any of our electricity that we consume, or are they related to our greenhouse gas emissions. It's mainly a financial vehicle that was made available in the state about 10 years ago, where because the law requires utilities to buy any electricity generated by a PV system, the private developers assign those rights to receive the payments to cities and towns who get remunerated from the utility at a higher rate than a private company could get. So what we've been able to do through the 3 contracts that we've signed is basically expand the amount of PV available in the state. And there are 3 contracts that are basically that have added like 4.5 megawatts of solar capacity throughout the state. And for fiscal year 19, we were very conservative in terms of how much we thought those payments that we are required to pay through these contracts were, and basically this will enable us to finish out the fiscal year. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it does help me understand a little bit better. Thank you. I guess I'm still curious how much of our municipal electric consumption is being offset by solar production at this point.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's 7.2%. We had set a goal of 5%, I don't know, 8 years ago. And so we're going to exceed that by at least 2.2%. And we think Once Graham Parks is done, it'll maybe in excess of that as well, maybe by 2.5%. So between 7.2 and 7.5% of our electricity will be off PV installed in the city.
So you're not including these virtual net metering agreements in that total? Okay. And what's our goal? When are we trying to get to 100%, and how do we get there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the goal is to be net zero by 2050. We're presently in the process of establishing a 2030 goal, which we hope to have with the City Council, I would say maybe by the fall of this year. So the goal is to get to zero by 2050. And so if you draw a straight line between now and then, we should be in the order of about 50% reduction by 2030.
Thank you. I would encourage us to get there sooner. And maybe these virtual net metering agreements can help us do that. I calculated that we're paying about 22.5 cents per kilowatt hour based on the numbers you provided. That's pretty competitive in terms of the total cost that we pay for electricity. So why not do more of that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I also just wanted to add that we are also working towards getting 100% of the electricity that we buy through renewable sources. And we're also working on that. That may take us a few years before we get there, but that is also will be huge for us to be able to say that we're truly buying all of our electricity from renewable sources.
Thank you. I can't wait.
Anything further? Roll call.
Councilor Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Councilor Kelly. Councilor Mallon.
Yes.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Councilor Simmons. Yes. Councilor Toomey. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 4 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 6, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to awaiting report item number 18-61 regarding a report on commissioning a public art piece, statue, or memorial that would commemorate the dedication of women in Cambridge to passing the 19th Amendment. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just wanted to say first, I'm really excited about this committee that was put together. It has so many really amazing women, both in our city departments, so Kimberly Sansusi from the Women's Commission, Tanya Ford from the Election Commission, Sarah Burke from Historical, as well as some really famous women in this field. So Barbara Berenson, who literally wrote the book called Massachusetts Women in the Suffrage Movement. She went to Harvard and Harvard Law, so she's no stranger to Cambridge. And Jane Kaminsky, who lives here in Cambridge and is the director of the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe, which has an impressive collection of suffrage materials, papers and leaflets and artifacts from that time period that we actually went and saw, which was pretty incredible that it's all living here at Radcliffe. And of course, other amazing Cambridge women who are connected to the arts, and our honorary members and inspirations, Sophia Bernstein and her mom, Kimberly, who spoke at public comment. An earlier speaker mentioned the effort to get Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, and Sophia, as a third grader, actually started that conversation when she wrote a letter to President Obama, who read that at a press conference, and she actually worked with the Obama administration to help make that happen. Well, it didn't happen. It will happen someday because of Sophia and her work. So I have a couple of questions. The first one, $300,000 is a significant amount of city funding for a project like this for public money. We've done quite a lot of research to see what public funding looks like for large projects. I just wanted to clarify, well, first I wanted to thank the city manager and the deputy city manager for working so hard, and Jason Weeks from the Arts Council for working so hard to put this number together. I just wanted to clarify, so it's just for the artwork only, it's not for lighting or sighting, is that correct?
That's correct. And also for the artwork and the payment for the artist as well.
Okay. And then my next question is, I noticed that the first meeting is tomorrow, so this is a really timely report back, and that we're hoping to for the design selection to be August 2020 to commemorate the anniversary of the 19th Amendment. So what in there between tomorrow and August 2020, where in there is the RFQ or RFP looking to be? What's a target date for some of that work to be sent out? I'm just curious what happens between tomorrow and August 2020.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, excuse me. We're so excited about this as well. So thank you for the opportunity to speak about it. And a lot of work has gone into this. So I'm deeply grateful to the city manager and the deputy manager for their support, but especially to the councilor for driving this forward in such a positive way. I think, the idea of putting a committee together in this way, and such a talented committee, is to help organize the thinking around this. And that thinking would go directly into the RFP or RFQ. And so, we'll need several meetings to lay out some of the history, for the group to start to get to know one another well and to work together. And for us to collect that thinking and to, to write those thoughts down and make sure that all of that gets into the document. So I would imagine, the things that we've talked about that are critical as sort of first steps is thinking about certainly that history and understanding that it's an ongoing history, that we're not completely there yet, as we've talked about in many settings. But also to figure out some really viable sites in the city where this could go. And I think, where it's sited is of tremendous import, in all of this work. And so that will be a part of the first two meetings. The third meeting, we're going to really sort of unpack the public art making process to ensure that everybody knows how that works, what the individual roles are in that work. And then, shortly after that, I think we'll be able to synthesize a lot of that and really begin the process of developing that RFQ. So that will happen, really at the front end of the process and guide the selection process throughout.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Jason, are you on this committee? I'm just curious what your role is in this.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will be there along also with Lillian Sue, the Director of Public Art at the Arts Council, and also Kathy Watkins, who you don't see listed on there, but we're going to be involved throughout, as we have been, in the lead up to this. But we were really careful to make sure that as we were developing a committee, it was a committee of residents more than it was a committee of city staff. And so we'll be there, every step of the way and in and out of meetings and to do all of the work to make sure that we get to a successful outcome.
Oh, thank you. I think it's so important for this group to be supported. I'm glad to see that you're going to be involved, and Kathy Watkins also, and Lillian. So I didn't see your name on here, so I was curious what your role was going to be. So thank you for clarifying. I'm glad to hear that you guys are going to be spending so much time on the history. Because I think it's really important that we get this right. The narrative about the suffrage movement doesn't always tell the whole story, specifically the role of white feminism and how there was a schism in the movement and how many women, namely African American women, were left way behind and didn't actually get to vote until the Voting Rights Acts in the 1960s. So Councillor Siddiqui and I went to New York City in October last year to do some research for this project and met with the New York City Cultural Affairs Director, the New York Historical Society, about the real suffrage experience and how we might work here in Cambridge to ensure that that whole story is told through our art piece and not to further whitewash the suffrage movement. When we were in New York City, we also met with a private group who fundraised to erect a bronze statue of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, two prominent white women who helped lead the suffrage movement in the narrative. But it has been and continues to receive criticism as not being inclusive enough and will continue to perpetuate the troubling narrative of the suffrage movement. I think we have a real opportunity to do this with a more inclusive way here in Cambridge and to tell the whole story and ensure that that story is laid out and use the 100th anniversary as a real teachable moment. So thank you so much for this funding. And as Sophia said earlier, she was surprised because she thought when she came here in June, it was all set. So I know how much work has gone behind this. I appreciate that work and I look forward to what's next.
Councilor Carlone and then Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It goes without saying that what we're trying to do here, at the encouragement of many people, is something very special and probably unique for the century. And I have to say, as great as the 300,000 is, that's a lot of money. In sculptural terms, it's not. Not for a significant memorial. And that's my only concern, that the end result might not be as grand as the idea and the commemoration is. So I'm hoping the possibility of additional funds. I don't know where this will head, but the question was asked, is this for the site prep and all that? Well, if it's on a granite base, whatever it is, that's big money. If there's going to be lighting of it, and I hope there is, that's big money. And the sculpture itself, I don't know what is being programmed, but if it's in bronze, and maybe you're not thinking that, maybe you're thinking it's a modern piece and not a figurative piece, I don't see how you can do something at the scale of the idea that we're commemorating. So all I'm getting at is I understand that's what we're talking about, the 300,000, but I sure hope we will live up to what this is hoping to be. Some modern sculpture, modern figurative sculpture has been undersized, and it loses much of its power if it's not appropriately sized. And sometimes if it's on a base and is raised, the height can be exaggerated and make it feel important, but 300,000 goes very far. I know you have experts that have come up with that number, but I hope the programming is as big as the idea and not as small as the budget might be. Thank you.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the city manager, deputy city manager, thank you. I want to echo Councilor Mallon's points as well. I remember us being in New York talking about this, so to see that this happen, it is a very unique thing that we're doing. And I think Councilor Mallon said this, but there were a lot of lessons learned from what happened in New York, and it is very important to name the marginalization of Black women during the suffrage movement. And I think obviously it'll come up as you go through these meetings and how we do everything we can to think about inclusion. As we are doing these deep conversations and talking about race and equity in our city, this is a prime example of where this will have to come up, and we'll have to engage with how are we going to be inclusive when it comes to civic art. But thank you so much for the support of this, and I've been very happy to be a part of this with my other female colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to remind folks we need to recess in 5 minutes. We can obviously come back to this, and I have 3 more people in the queue. Councilor Zondervan, Councilor Simmons, and then the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. As a non-female colleague, I nonetheless would like to express my support and enthusiasm for this project. I think it's great. And I also want to echo comments about the racial justice aspect of this project, and just really thank everyone for their attention to that aspect of it. And I look forward to the outcome. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Simmons.
I'll be brief. Not to reiterate anything that's been said so far, I'm very excited about the momentum and the meaning and the quality of the work that we're doing around what I often call rewriting history, because for so long women have been written out of history, and women of color in particular. So I'm very excited about this project and pleased to be able to be one of the co-sponsors. The only thing I want to add, because we know it's going to be a long process in many ways and a thorough process, is that we do some education along the way. I want you to bring young women, particularly young women of color, along in the process. I want, when this is finished, for them to feel it belongs to them as well. And too often, so you've got a real good beginning because you have a committee that's not what I call the usual suspects, because they're easier and they're well informed. The committee is broad. There were names that I didn't know, and I was pleased about that because it's usually so many people that you know and say, oh, so-and-so's been asked to do it again. So that's good. But the other part of that is as we're doing it, is that we bring other people along, because it's going to be those young women and men that are going to be walking through and say, I had a part of that, and pass that story around. So it begins to have a living legacy, and that I think is just as important as the monument. So somehow, and I really want it written down, because if we don't write it down and make it a part of the action plan, it just won't happen. So I hope my colleagues will agree with that and say that there should be some sort of education project process that goes along, that runs in tandem with it. Thank you.
Yeah, Vice Mayor.
Very briefly, I'll just observe that it sounds like the first decision is the siting, and the siting then will obviously drive both the scale and potentially even the association that this has. So that's a very important decision. And then the second thing I would say is that we're all assuming that it's a sculpture, and it says it's a piece of public art. So I guess just wanted to sort of say that, because I don't know if that's, depending on the site, it may not be a sculpture, it could be some other public art, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief as well. I think there is the belief that we'll have some type of long-term durable outcome here, so that there's something, for many, many years, if not generations, for people to see and to experience. But to Councilor Simmons' point, and just to the practice and field of public art, it's not just about, creating objects anymore. As we've seen through the Flow Grant program for the port, there's many types of ways that we can do creative placemaking that is about education, that is about experiential learning. So I would imagine it'll be a combination of those types of things. But of course, we'll leave it to the committee and to the artists to dream, and then, provide advice and support on how we can have an outcome that will reflect the thinking that's gone into this, and really the needs and the opportunity that I think we have as a city.
Thank you. I wasn't speaking of its permanence. I was speaking of the form it takes. So I think we're on the same page there. Thanks.
Okay, so the question comes on approving the appropriation and placing the matter on file. Roll call.
Council Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
Yes.
Council Simmons.
Yes.
Council Toomey. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 6 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9
Okay, so we're going to recess for about 10 or 15 minutes. I invite everyone to join us outside. City Council is back in session. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 7, a communication transmitted from Louis A. D. Pasquale, City Manager, relative to a waiting report, Item Number 18-91, regarding a report on a plan to allow the Mayor's annual Harvard Senior Luncheon to be held regardless of weather conditions. I pulled this because there were some things in the report, or that weren't in the report, that I just want to add, just because Sandra Albano from the Mayor's office has been was working on this issue as well, and so some of the things that that she had tried to address that weren't in the report, so people know that there was there were other things besides what was in there. We took a look at the possibility of using the Harvard sports facility, athletic facility in Alston. There were some concerns that were raised about that. We looked at local hotel accommodations. We looked at swapping the dates of the MIT and Harvard event to schedule the indoor MIT event in the hotter months, as well as using the field house at Ringe and Latin, which would have been a possibility this year, but they're having some renovations done, but it could be a possibility in future years. So I know the report said that in the last 4 decades, it's only been canceled a couple times. And so that was good information to have. But I think we should continue to kind of look at this and look at other opportunities so that it's not an issue going forward. But I just wanted to make that acknowledgement. Sandra's put a lot of work into this, and I wanted to make sure that folks knew that we were working on this as well, and explored a number of options that weren't in the report. Any comments on placing the matter on file? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 12, transmitting communication from Louis A. D. Pasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $70,000 from free cash to the Public Investment Fund Human Services Program Extraordinary Expenditures Account for the purchase of a new ADA accessible bus. Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Clearly, we need this, and we're doing it, and that's great. An ADA accessible vehicle is fairly unique, given everything that it has to do to protect people. So this has been priced out at $70,000, and that is sufficient to get a true ADA vehicle. It seems low, and I'm not on a low run today, but it does seem low, and I just want to make sure it's sufficient, and so we know what we're getting, and it covers it sufficiently.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we believe this is adequate money. We have purchased vehicles in the past, and we are using this largely to allow the 2007 vehicle that we have to be our backup vehicle rather than our everyday vehicle. So this is a price that we believe we can get the vehicle we need. We're looking for a 15-passenger van with a wheelchair, and our cost estimates make that seem quite reasonable.
That's great. I just wanted to verify that indeed it is sufficient, because you can buy many cars that are much more than that, and they seat 2 people. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Through you, I don't know if for that price or if for any price these vans come in an electric model. It would be great to start getting our fleet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're happy to take a look at that, and I was aware that you might ask that question, and so I communicated with the city has a Green Fleet Committee, and I communicated with the staff of that committee today to try to get a sense of whether that's possible. We will look at it. Our best guess is that we can't actually make that work right now. We will be able to get a hybrid But the likelihood that we can get the vehicle and have it meet our needs, be able to be serviced locally, it seems like we're a little too soon to be able to do that. But there was great interest in at least exploring that before we actually made the purchase, and so we will take a look at that, but I don't want to hold out false hope that we'll actually be able to make that work right now. But we are interested in trying to figure out, if not now, we will need another vehicle before that much longer and see whether that's possible.
Great. Thanks for giving it the thought. Appreciate it.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had the exact same question. Vice Mayor beat me to it. Thanks for trying, and good luck.
Councilor Kelly?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for putting the thought into getting the van. I went to an autonomous vehicle talk last month, and also I call it electronic hitchhiking, but it's really a peer-to-peer car sharing talk. And the community that's really left out of these discussions, to include how you build an autonomous vehicle, is the disabled community, whether it's because they're physically challenged or they're deaf or they can't see, or all sorts of things that just aren't brought into the planning process for any of these things. And places or companies like Uber manage to dodge any responsibility by claiming they're not in the transportation business, so the ADA doesn't apply to them. They're just connecting people who also don't seem to be in the business, so the ADA doesn't apply to them. So I really appreciate your taking a proactive step in doing what this city can do, whether it's electric or not. So thank you. And from the electric standpoint, apparently getting the batteries the right size can be a real challenge to making a vehicle actually work from an accessibility standpoint. So I really appreciate this.
Okay. Roll call.
Councilor Carlone?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux?
Yes.
Councilor Kelly? Councilor Mallon?
Yes.
Councilor Siddiqui?
Yes.
Councilor Simmons? Councilor Toomey? Councilor Zondervan?
Yes.
Mayor McGovern?
Yes.
And agenda item number 12 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move to City Manager, agenda item number 13, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to awaiting report item number 18-65 regarding organizing a town hall meeting for Cambridge youth. This was pulled by Councilor Simmons.
And thank you for this report. I was happy to see a response back from you about this youth town hall meeting. As policy officials, it's important for us to hear from all constituents, whether they can vote for us or not. I just thought it was an important thing that we would do, and so I'm glad to see that it's being done. And I see that you were looking to having the Youth Policy Council being the planning arm. I think that's a great idea. I just wanted to offer a suggestion. And so I'm thinking I would like to refer this to the Civic Unity Committee just to talk a little bit more about who should be on the planning committee. The Youth Policy Council, as most people know, is an extraordinary group of young people, extraordinary. They're, I would say, the movers and shakers of the next generation. I want to talk a little bit about how we get on this planning committee some of the atypical young people. How do we reach out to those that don't ordinarily get appointed, select, or elect to be on an organizing committee? And so I just want to kind of tease that out a little bit. So I want to forward this, or ask that after it's adopted, that it gets forwarded to the Civic Unity Committee to talk a little bit more about what kinds of unique ways can we do outreach to get a few more young people to participate in the planning of the event. Thank you.
Yes, okay, we're getting nods. Vice Mayor?
I think that's,
I'm sorry, Councilor, Councilor Simmons.
Thank you. I yield the floor.
okay, thank you, through you. I think that's a great idea. I also wanted to mention that on April 10th, we'll be holding a committee hearing to discuss potentially reviving the youth voting initiative that actually was adopted by the council about a decade ago for 16-year-olds to vote, but didn't pass the state legislature home rule petition. But there is new, impetus at the state legislature to revive this, and so we're going to be discussing it at a committee hearing. And I hope some of the members of our youth council will come and other young people. So this is great that we'll be having a town hall as well. Thank you.
Anything further? On placing the matter on file. Referring to civic unity. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 14, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to a waiting report Item Number 19-24 regarding pedestrian safety improvements at the intersection of Day Street and Massachusetts Avenue, and a waiting report 19-31 regarding general safety improvements at the intersection of Spring Street and 3rd Street. I pulled this to thank you for your quick turnaround on this. I think the Spring Street order went in a couple weeks ago at the most. And I don't know I know Councilor Toomey was working on these. I didn't know if he had wanted to speak about it. No. Mr. Barr, can you just reiterate for the public sort of what's going to happen and what kind of time frame we're looking at?
Sure. We actually have been talking about this for a little while, and this is an area at Spring Street and 3rd Street where we had heard, a number of reports of crashes, and when we went and looked at the crash statistics, it did jump out as an area, fairly uniquely within the neighborhood where there seemed to be a specific safety problem. And although, in the future there may be some changes to the surrounding development, but in the interim, we felt like a all-way stop was the best way to approach this. So we'll be we want to make sure we install the pavement markings and the signs at the same time. So it's a priority for us as soon as the weather warms up a little bit and our pavement markings contractor is able to get out on the street to do work. We'll make sure that this is one of the first items that we get done. So it's a little hard to say, but I would anticipate that we would have it done before the end of the month. And we'll also be making sure that we have appropriate warning signs, stop sign ahead, and new traffic pattern signs on 3rd Street, just to make sure that people who are used to driving through there for many years without a stop sign are attuned to it. It's a little hard, as we saw on Ridge Avenue. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for people to adjust, but we'll also work with the police department to do some enforcement at the same time to make sure that we reinforce that message.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. On placing the matter on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 15, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to a waiting report Item Number 18-133 regarding a report on raising the fines for blocking both loading zones and bike lanes to a comparable rate to Boston for the 2020 fiscal year. This was pulled by Vice Mayor Devereaux. You have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, I just want to confirm that I read this memo correctly, because there were a lot of references to state statutes and so forth in it. But the gist of it appears to be that if we want to be able to raise the violation, the fees for blocking a bike lane or a loading zone, we would need to go for a home rule petition. Is that correct? I guess that's to the
Through
city
you,
solicitor.
Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct.
And so currently, for blocking a loading zone, it's $40, and for a bike lane, it's $50. And Boston, for instance, charges $90 for blocking a loading zone and $100 for blocking a bike lane. In your experience, is raising the fine, has that served as more of a deterrent? Do you think Boston is having greater success in enforcing these rules because they have higher fines? I mean, my gut would like to raise the fines, and I know that a lot of people out there who are really frustrated by this competition over curb space would like us to raise the fines, and I'd be happy to sponsor a home rule petition to do it. I want to make sure that you guys think that it's would be effective. Should the state allow us to do it?
So through you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess I would say yes. It's a little early, I think, with Boston to tell what impact it's having, either fiscally or in terms of behavior. But I think generally, the theory is that we raise fines on things that we think are more critical violations, and so I would definitely think that raising the fines, above the current level for these critical safety violations, and the state has allowed us to have, bus stop fines are $100, accessible parking violations can be I believe, up to $250. Ours are currently set at 120 fire hydrants. So there's a few select categories of violations that are allowed to be higher. And I think some of these other safety violations, particularly as the world has, evolved and we recognize that, bike lanes and other specific curb uses are important to protect. That, from my perspective as the director of Traffic, Park, and Transportation, I think it would be appropriate to have higher fines. We are planning, subject obviously to the budget process, to raise the loading zone fine to $50, which is, as described in the city solicitor's memo, the maximum that we're allowed to do as a sort of baseline. But I do think there would be some value in having the ability to go above that.
Thank you. And then, so a follow-up question, I guess, to the city solicitor. If we were to do this home rule petition, would we be petitioning just for the permission to raise the fines, and then we could talk about amongst ourselves about what they would be, or would we be petitioning for specific amounts?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we typically would ask for the specific amounts, and I think that usually the legislature would prefer to have a specific amount that's being proposed.
And then if we wanted to raise it in the future, we would have to then repetition? Like, say we went to, I don't know, $100, and then 5 years from now Boston raised it and we wanted to go to 150. Would we have to go back each time? How does this process work?
I'd like to be able to look into it more and get back to you, but I think probably, yes, we'd have to go back, but we can look into whether we could approach it with any more flexibility than that.
Okay, then I guess maybe this is a question for Mr. Barr. In terms of helping us draft a potential home rule petition, I personally would want some guidance in, okay, well, so, what should we be asking for? What's the reasonable / maximum amount that we think would be justifiable, successful, and wouldn't have us going back in another couple of years to ask for more, maybe?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess a couple of thoughts on that. One, as I just mentioned, many other critical violations are allowed to be up to $100. So that might be that's a starting point. We haven't thought about it or talked about a specific number. So that's one possibility. I believe, if I'm reading the city solicitor's memo correctly, that in Boston they actually do have some level of flexibility to set it by local ordinance. So the special legislation that they have does, not necessarily state a maximum amount other than the sort of standard ordinance violation, which I believe is $300, but they do have some flexibility. The other option, which I don't know if could be done through a home rule petition, is to, as the memo lays out, section 28.5 of the Mass General Laws is what provides this specific limit in to the cities of Boston and Cambridge. We have our own special section, as it turns out. And so another option, again, I don't know if this could be done through a home rule or just would have to be more of a standard legislative process, would be to propose raising that overall limit as a general thing. That may be more complicated, so I would guess that if we want to do something more strategic, we may just want to go for a specific home rule legislation specific to limited violations, because I think there may be more concerns if we want to raise just the general amount of the fines that we can charge. I believe it was last raised in 2007 or 2009 as part of the overall transportation reform legislation that created MassDOT.
Okay. Thank you. Some of my other colleagues may want to weigh in on process. I'm happy to pursue this, but I'm kind of need probably time to think about how the best way to go about it is.
Okay. Everybody's got a hand up. I've got Councilor Carlone, Councilor Mallon, Councilor Zondervan, Councilor Siddiqui, and I think I saw one more over here, Councilor Kelly. Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be quick. My questions are in a related area. We all see trucks in the bike lane every day. And so my question is, what are they supposed to do? Now, on Mass Avenue, near where I live, a lot of retail, there are 2 lanes of traffic. So you could say, well, you block 1 lane of traffic. And why I'm saying this is the loading zones, as you know, sometimes are full. So is the truck supposed to go on a side street and just walk further? Is that what we would like them to do? I don't think it's clear, and that I could be wrong, and that might be part of the problem, other than we want to be as close as we can. I get that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, I mean, certainly our regulations and our perspective is that they need to find a legal parking space, so whether that's a loading zone or, parking meters or somewhere around the corner that's available. So I think, there's certainly nothing in our regulations that allows anyone to legally double stop or block a travel lane. Obviously, we do see that on a regular basis. One of the things that one of the initiatives we're working on based on the truck study we did and the truck summit we had last November is creating additional loading zones, particularly during the morning hours, because that's when we see the highest demand for truck loading. So I think we do need to look at more flexible use of space in order to address the issue that you're raising. But in terms of the legalities, if they're double stopped, regardless of how many travel lanes, et cetera, that is illegal.
And the last question, if bike lanes are moved inside someday toward the curb, like Brattle Street, then you wouldn't have this conflict. I mean, you might have other conflicts, but you wouldn't have that. So that's another advantage of that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Mallon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I just wanted to speak to what the Vice Mayor was saying around a home rule petition. I would be amenable to that. I think we had originally asked for this because Boston their ticket prices were so much higher than ours, and it seemed to be maybe a great deterrent. In all of our squares, there's a lot of people that park in the bike lanes, and a lot of people that park in the bike lanes because there's people parked in the loading zones. So it seems like a compounded problem that this could be one of the tools in our toolbox to actually help out with that. So I would be amenable to a home rule petition with prices that are commensurate to what Boston is doing right now, which is $100 for a bike lane violation and $90 for a loading zone violation. And I think you said earlier that as part of the budget, you're coming forward with a loading zone violation going from $40 to $50. So yeah, I would actually like to see us try to figure something else out that would actually be a deterrent. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I can risk a $40 ticket or a $50 ticket, but if you see a sign posted that says $90 or $100, I think you'd be less likely to block that bike lane. So I'll look forward to figuring out how we're going to move forward with that if other people are amenable.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak after Councilor Siddiqui. I think she had her hand up first.
Councilor Siddiqui?
I was just going to say that perhaps this warrants another Transportation Committee meeting to just discuss the home rule, because, that way you can get some more voices in the room and we can think through think through it more. That's just a suggestion. You're the chair, but if you need time to think, then it could be worth doing that. Thanks.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm ready to do a home rule. I'm ready right now. So, I'm fully in support of that.
Councilor Kelly?
Thank you. I'm having some difficulty understanding the data, and I'll be talking to the police department tomorrow about this, but it looks like we've had a drop in bike lane violation citations, and I can't find the 2018 stuff online. But I think the bigger point is, if we're trying to improve safety, I think we need to be really certain that increasing bike lane violation enforcement and fines is going to do that, because if what we trade for clear bike lanes is a lot of delivery trucks continuously circling the block in order to find that legal parking spot, we're going backwards. And we know beyond a doubt that moving trucks that are turning are infinitely more dangerous than trucks that are not moving. And before we go down this path, I think we need to be really, really clear about where it's going to take us. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Final thought. Could our rate be explicitly tied to Boston's? Is that something that's like...
Ms. Glover?
Because it
Through
would
you,
be,
Mr. Mayor, what I would propose is, if it's the council's pleasure to proceed with this, that we could look into the best way to formulate it and then report back to you, whether it's here or in committee.
that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so the pleasure comes on placing the matter on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 16, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to awaiting report Item Number 19-12 regarding a report on legality and constitutionality of the proposed Cambridge Publicly Financed Municipal Election Program and the Cambridge Municipal Election People's Pledge, and awaiting report Item Number 18-136 regarding a report on submitting a proposal that candidates would agree to not accept donations from persons outside of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank the manager and the city solicitor and the deputy city manager and the election commissioner for this report. Certainly is a complicated issue that we all recognize that, and this is quite a report, and it'd be my intention, after my colleagues have any comments, that I request that this go to the Government Operations Committee for a hearing where we can kind of delve into it in a bit of fashion than here on the council floor. It is complicated. There's some things that I'd like to pursue and get further answers on, but I think it'd be best to have the preliminary discussion in the committee process and then bring it back to the council, see what we can come up with. And I appreciate this is finally here in front of us, and I'd just ask that that committee hearing be televised too. So if that's the will of the council, to send it to Government Operations for a further hearing.
Pleasure of the council. On referring to the Government Operations Committee, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 17, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to awaiting report Item Number 19-01 regarding a report on the recently adopted regulations of the short-term rental revenue and the necessary steps to impose and assess the revenue from excise and community impact fees. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the manager and his staff. This seems like a never-ending journey down the road of regulating a emerging use that we couldn't have conceived many years ago, and now we have the opportunity to tax, and that is short-term rentals that we generally refer to as Airbnb. My understanding is this is sort of a no-brainer step, a two-step process to get the taxing part done, both for the very rare commercially operated Airbnb short-term rental, and then subsequent to that, the typical homeowner's short-term rental. The larger question then is, how do we make it happen, which is something that we've been kicking around for a while, because I believe compliance is still lower than we would like given the number of short-term rentals we see. So if you could explain just briefly the taxing process that I hope we all will approve of tonight, and then give us a little bit of a heads up of what the future might hold in terms of the state registration and the city's ability to actually get people to register and get the tax dollars from them. I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Kale.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So as you are aware, the state recently adopted legislation to begin the taxing of short-term rentals. A registry is part of the legislation, which we've been in contact with the state that they guarantee will be up and running before July 1, which is when they are supposed to have it up and running, hopefully before then. We are continuing our efforts, and we will be notifying our property owners about our local ordinance with regard to short-term rentals and their requirement to register with the Inspectional Services Department and to have an inspection done, as well as remind them that in the month of June that they will be required, if they are using their homes for short-term rentals, to register with the state so that they can continue to, or be required to pay their taxes. And then we will receive the income from the state upon tax collections like we do for our hotel motel tax. So I think that we are, again, doing another round of outreach to our citizens to remind them of what our local ordinance is, as well as notifying them about the state requirement to register on the state's webpage. With regard to that notification, we will remind folks to be in contact with us to answer any questions, and we will continue to outreach and do enforcement as needed.
Thank you. Do we have any expectation that somehow the state's being involved in this becoming a tax revenue source? People will start paying more attention to compliance than arguably they may be doing now when it's simply a city zoning ordinance?
If you don't pay your taxes, the legislation says you are personally liable. So there is a little more teeth in legislation if you don't comply with the state statute to pay the fee.
And will the state have enforcement capacity, or does that still rest with the city?
With regard to the taxes, that will rest with the state. With regard to the local ordinance, that rests with us, I believe, city solicitor. And then, again, one of the things that we're trying to get clarification on, but I believe it's in legislation, about what the specificity of the addresses of the folks who register with the state. The legislation, I believe, says we will get the street name, not necessarily the address, but we will get some information that way help our enforcement activities.
So in the perfect world, everyone registers and we get the tax revenue and we spend it the way it's supposed to be done. In the less perfect world, some people register and pay taxes. Some people don't, and they continue to operate as a short-term rental, which I think we'll have to circle around sometime later this summer and review what we're doing to bring those people who are choosing not to register either into the fold of those who have registered or into the world of people who aren't doing short-term rental, because we get to the point where we're simply not being fair to people who have followed the rules. And it's one thing when they didn't register and someone else registered. It's another thing when people are actually paying taxes and folks aren't paying taxes and are operating the same thing next door down the street. I don't think there's an easy answer to this, and I know we've talked about data scrapers, and you have challenged me to find that data scraper who can in fact do everything that they advertise, which I have yet to find. But I think I take confidence that the state is somewhat on board and that we are all at least alert to the challenges ahead, and we'll see whether we can meet them successfully. But I appreciate your efforts on this.
Thank you. I have Councillor Zondervan, followed by the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This certainly sounds like progress, so I'm glad for that. Is there any opportunity to integrate our local registry with the state? Because it sounds like right now people have to register twice, and then we can't correlate them because we don't get the street number?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's essentially correct, because we're not entitled, as the statute appears to be written, to obtain the specific addresses from the state registry, and yet we do require to register with the city and have an inspection, et cetera, in order to operate in Cambridge. So they are two different sets of requirements. We can use the information as best we can from the state to assist us in, further searching to make sure that we have people register and follow the requirements of the ordinance. And we have had some success with that as we've learned of violators and have used the opportunity in many cases to bring them into line and get them to register and follow the rules. So there is some success in following that process, but I don't know how much more information we'll be able to get from the state to assist us in that regard.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, what's the thinking behind not giving us the address? Why would the state not give us the full information?
Mr. Gale.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a great question. That is, I think, part of the negotiation process that took place in getting the legislation passed. As you recall, the legislation did not make it in formal session, so this was a legislation that was passed in informal session, so it didn't have a lot of changes or had no changes that could be required without unanimous consent. So I think that was part of the negotiation process as part of the state statute passage.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you. And would you say that it would be advantageous if we did get the full address?
Mr. Gale?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Vice Mayor Devereaux?
Thank you. I have a couple of follow-up questions. I noticed that most of these fees, the chart was really helpful because we have the state room occupancy excise tax, which is 5.7%. That goes to the state. We have the local option room occupancy tax, another 6%, which is collected, goes to the state, but then it says the state distributes the city's share back to the city. How is that share calculated?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the 6% is the local share of, so it would be 5.7% to the state, and then the other 6% comes back to the city.
Okay. So we do get 6% there. It's a little unclear. Okay. And then there's the convention center financing fee of 2.75. Half of that comes to the city. Then we get down to the community impact fee that says that we can assess up to 3%, and you're recommending that we do the full 3% on this. Okay. There's an exemption for a short-term rental host who does it for less than 14 days a year. Who enforces? Who tracks that? Who keeps people honest on that? Is that the state?
Under the law, you're still supposed to register with the state, and even though you have that 14 or under exemption, you still have to register and be exempt from the state statute.
But is Airbnb or any of the platforms going to be helping? You're smiling. Us figure out who's actually. I mean, is it just an honor system, essentially? We don't know.
I think that's one of the things that we've been working with the state to sort of understand the mechanics of how the registry will work and how that 14-day exemption will actually be monitored.
Yeah. And who is it? Primarily the state's duty to communicate to people that this new requirement to register and pay and to start paying taxes exists. How will that be? Or is that on us?
I would suspect that folks who use Airbnb, for example, to post their homes on the webpage will implement the taxes that go with that rental.
So it's going to be integrated into Airbnb's platform for hosts, right?
I would believe so.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess the cost of short-term rentals for guests is going to go up pretty significantly, and it will be interesting to see if the demand survives that, sort of like with the TNCs, which have had relatively low rates because they're willing to lose millions of dollars. So I guess we'll see how the market handles the additional costs and so forth. Thank you.
Mr. Manager, I have a question. So the law requires that at least 35% of the community impact fee go to affordable housing and infrastructure. So have you given thought, or will you be coming back to us with that percentage, and do we have any thoughts as to what that might yield?
The thoughts on what it yield is real difficult. Mr. Keel's been working on this. I just want to say, based on the questions, you can see there's still a lot of unanswered questions here, but I want to thank Inspectional, the law, and the Finance Department for really putting a lot of effort in to try to get every possible question that we could get answered, and a lot of the questions that were asked today is what we've been talking about, and it is difficult. There is no money in the budget that will be projected from this. Clearly, once we get a better handle and have an idea, the 35% to me is not an issue, because it certainly, I would recommend at least that. But as we said earlier, when the council order came up, I'm open to discussion to say if the council feels it should be 100%. I'm not opposed to that, but I think we can have a discussion as this comes up and as cannabis comes up on what percentage we feel should go to affordable housing. But we'll come up with, and we really would prefer to work with the council on that to make sure we're all on the same page.
Great, thank you. If there's nothing further, we have to adopt both orders with separate roll calls, or, okay. Madam Clerk?
Counsel Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Counsel Kelly. Counsel Mallon.
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui.
Yes.
Counsel Simmons. Counsel Toomey. Counsel Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 17A is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 members. Counsel Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Counsel Kelly. Counsel Mallon.
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui.
Yes.
Counsel Simmons.
Yes.
Counsel Toomey. Counsel Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 17B is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
Thank you. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 18, a communication transmitted from Louis A. D. Pasquale, City Manager, relative to a request for approval to seek authorization from the Massachusetts Office of the Inspector General, the IG, for the city to use the Construction Manager at Risk, CMAR, procurement and construction method, the CMAR method, in connection with the Tobin Montessori and Vassal Lane Upper Schools project. Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to give you all an opportunity to quickly just re-explain the construction manager at risk procurement process. I know we've used it in the past, and I know it's been explained to the council before, but I know there's also a high level of public interest in this Tobin School, Vassal Lane School reconstruction project, so I just want to make sure that that information is kind of out there again. So, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. You know, the construction manager at risk process is one that we have used very successfully in a number of large construction projects. So it's only, you have to have at least $5 million in construction, so this very much exceeds that. So we would expect that this would be approved. But it is the method that we've used for the Martin Luther King School and for the King Open and Cambridge Street Upper School, as well as 5 Western Ave. And we were recently approved for the work that will happen at City Hall, and we're waiting approval on the foundry as well. It is a competitive procurement process that's based on qualifications and price, so it's sort of a two-step process where we first request qualifications from construction managers, and then we put out, and then there's a request for proposal. We can go into more detail about what the procurement process is like, but perhaps I can have, if you'd like more detail, I can ask Michael Black to go into that.
No, I don't, personally, I don't need it. I think I'm comfortable with it. I know that we've voted to use it in other large projects like this, and I think the benefit is that it gives us more flexibility to work with the contractor from an early stage and throughout the process, so that we're not sort of in the guessing game of, well, we thought it was going to cost X, but it's really going to cost X plus, and who has to, so the contractor is assuming some of the risk, but they're willing to do that because they're involved earlier on in the process, so they have a better sense of what they're getting into. And from the meetings that you've had with the geotechnical and environmental consultants, you know, who are helping with this feasibility study, it looks like a project that's going to be on the more complicated end of, you know, of executing. And so it seems prudent to me to have this kind of procurement process, but I just wanted to have everybody feel comfortable with that, because it's not the typical, you put out a bid and you take the lowest bidder and then you haggle over lots of change orders. That's my very, very, very basic understanding of procurement.
Well, I think, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that is actually a very good description. And I do want to stress it is really advantageous to the project and to the city to have a construction management firm that is involved during the design process, and particularly one that is as complicated as this, where they would work both with CDM Smith and with Perkins Eastman.
Councilor Carlo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can say that an early East Cambridge public project went to the lowest bidder and everybody was thrilled. And that bidder then went bankrupt along the way, which caused havoc. And not that some problems couldn't occur with any process, but in a way this is a buffer. I'm assuming the CM will select subs not solely on low price as well, but on the quality of who they are and their experience. So it in a way, it's built-in insurance. So I think, just one quick question, had there been any negatives that come to mind on previous projects because of the process?
Mr. Black.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, none to date.
Yes, that's, I assume that was a lead. But again, that you're working with quality people, and that makes all the difference. So I congratulate the city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Nothing further? Roll call.
Council Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
Yes.
Council Simmons.
Yes.
Council Toomey. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern. And agenda item number 18 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move to City Manager Agenda Item 19, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the proposed cannabis business permitting ordinance. Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, before we vote to move this to ordinance, I wanted to just quickly give a few thoughts. We heard some suggestions today that I'd like the staff to review and consider. If you don't have the suggestions, we'll forward that on. I think that I'm very glad that we've had so many conversations on the topic of cannabis equity. This topic, there seems to be an article a day about it. There's a spotlight series about just what is being discovered. Of the 12 recreational shops that have opened so far, all but 2 are owned by or have ties to large out-of-state investors or multi-state operators. Meanwhile, out of more than 120 applicants approved for the state program aimed at helping startups for minority and disadvantaged communities, not one is open yet, largely due to a lack of funding. And I bring that up because there's going to be a lot of issues that we can't tackle all at once. This funding element is a big one. But I think as we move forward on this conversation, we have to think about the other pieces and have further discussions about specific programs where we are helping this class of entrepreneurs. Just as there's artists, just as there's different types of businesses, this is the economic empowerment group will be a type of business. And it is important that we get this right. It is scary how much money is involved and how it seems all the advantages are going to the big money people. That's a title of a Boston Globe article as well. So I want us to be cognizant of it, and I thank my colleagues who've worked with me on pushing this issue. We've had several meetings, and I hope that this meeting that we have in ordinance, we can. I think there's a lot of good stuff here, and it is coming together. I think there's a few things that I would move that we think about and consider. I think there should be a catch-all category for other marijuana establishments as licensed by the commission for when social consumption and delivery licenses are eventually issued. I also think we have to talk about the 2 years. I think 2 years will go by fast. So, and even that number, obviously it came from somewhere. I think we've been talking about Somerville, we've been talking about Boston, but I think we have to have a further discussion on some of these things in ordinance. But I will send you some of my suggestions, and then I look forward to a further discussion, and then ideally ordaining it. I think the timeline has been very, very tight. I think we put a deadline of August 20th. I hope that, I don't think we're going to make that deadline August 20th.
April 20th.
April, sorry, April 20th. I think it would definitely make August, but I hope that I move that I ask the co-chairs of the ordinance that we schedule an ordinance meeting as soon as possible on the topic, because I think we are close, but obviously process-wise we have to have this meeting, and then hopefully we can move it forward. So that's all I want to say, but thank you for all the work on this. I think it's been a cross-collaborative effort by many different organizations who are valuing what cannabis equity is and what it could be. So thank you.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to thank my colleagues and the staff for bringing this forward so quickly. It's been a very productive and collaborative process. I'd like to get some clarification, because it's my understanding that we don't have to refer this to ordinance, that we could move it to a second reading as soon as tonight, which might give us a chance of meeting the deadline. I do have a couple of questions as well, and some potential amendments, but I would just like to understand the mechanics of how we want to do this.
So, if I may, even if we send this to a second reading, we're not hitting the deadline. The earliest we could do this is April 22nd, which is only 2 days after. But I think there are a lot of questions. I certainly have a lot of questions that I'd like to get answered, and I don't know if people are going to be able to answer those questions tonight. But I will hold. I have one question, but I'll go if when you're finished, Councilor Zondervan, Councilor Kelly will have the floor. But
thank you. So I'll just ask two questions that came up for me when I was reviewing it. One was in Section 5, the permitting requirements. It seemed to me like those were specific to priority A applicants only, but it didn't say that. So if you could clarify whether we're requiring all applicants to have like 51% minority on the board and so on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it was our understanding that that was the request was to make it applicable to all applicants.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then there was a reference further, Section 8A, that the permit may be revoked or not renewed if the permit holder has sold a cannabis product to a person under the minimum legal sales age 3 times or more. I would like us to consider once, knowingly, so that we add that clarification that if they knowingly do it even once, we can revoke the permit. Thank you.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the manager and the staff. The mechanics of, at least as I understand it, and I can claim no perfect knowledge, if we don't have this ordinance in place by the 20th, which we won't, we still don't have community host agreements. So it's not as if people will be able to start anything before the community host agreements are up. So we're not facing that timing constraint, I don't believe, although people of Massachusetts and the people of Cambridge asked to have recreational marijuana for sale, so we should give it to them as soon as we possibly can. That being said, looking at the proposal, I was a little confused by the Group A, Group B priority applicants, and it wasn't clear to me if Group B, the non-equity applicants, could get a permit if they, I didn't understand what they had, a special permit from the planning board, and then they also needed some conditional approval from the state agency. and if we have any that meet that criteria.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we actually realized in pursuant to a question that was raised that clause under a provisional, having a provisional certificate of registration from the Cannabis Control Commission was probably not feasible, and so we would recommend deleting that phrase. But it was the intention that an applicant sorry, I was looking at Group A. So with Group B, if you could repeat the question, that would be helpful.
So on page 110 of the packet, on section 4, permitting preferences for priority applicants, for the first 2 years, the suggestion is that we only permit Group B applicants if the equity applicants in Group A will have the same number, but then there's an exception or a proposed exception if the group, and I got to admit, I get the A's and B's confused, if the non-equity applicants have a special permit from the planning board and a provisional certificate. I'm understanding you to say the provisional certificate probably isn't something that we can refer to. So are we just going to say if you are in Group B, the non-equity applicants, and you don't have a provisional thing because you can't get one of those, but you get a special permit from the planning board, we can grant you that regardless of the balance between Group A and B?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I was looking at 4A, which is one condition. The after 2 years provision doesn't specifically say that you need to have the certificate, the provisional certificate of registration from the Cannabis Control Commission. So the idea behind the 4B is that after 2 years, even though both Group A and Group B applicants can proceed, there needs to be some parity so that you wouldn't have the Group A applicants, the equity, the economic empowerment or social equity applicants falling behind the businesses that already have an RMD license.
I understand that. I wasn't so much concerned about paragraph B. We could go over this some more, but I think this just underscores the point that moving this anywhere right now besides to a more detailed committee meeting is problematic, and I encourage everyone else to do what Councilor Siddiqui is going to do, and that is send notes and questions to you so that we're prepared to have a good discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Ms. Farouk, did you want to add? You were reaching for the mic.
I was. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stopped because I thought we had moved on from there, but I can shed some light on the 4A section, which I think is what Councillor Kelly was asking about. What this is suggesting is that applicants who fall under priority A would be able to get the business permit under the ordinance right away from applicants who fall under priority B if they have a special permit for a registered marijuana dispensary now, which is 5 entities right now have special permits. Of those, 3 are operational and additional 2 are not yet in play. So those 5 players would also be able to access the business permit within the first 2 years.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Oh, maybe it's because it's already 8:30, but I read that 4A about 5 times, and each time I read it, could it be drafted in a way that is less difficult to parse? Because the A-B thing, can we come up with different names? I mean, is priority A meant to mean that they have they're the top priority, or is it just we're just doing A and B? Because if it's really not indicating that they have greater priority than the existing RMDs with special permits, it's really confusing. So call them the whatever. But just to recap what I think you just said, the priority A people can apply and get these permits right away, and the B people, if they already have the special permit, would also be able to do it right away. And there's no relation, like you don't have to have an equal number of A's. You don't have to, they don't have to, the numbers don't have to match, because so we've already got potentially 7 of the RMDs operating or about to operate, because I thought you said 5 plus an additional 2? Aren't there?
No,
Through you, Mr.
5
Mayor.
total.
5 total that have a permit, out of whom 3 are already operational and 2 are not in operation.
Okay, so there are 5. So those 5 are basically, if they want to open, they can, and then any of these other people can also get in line for 2 years. That's the way it's, okay. It's hard. It's hard to parse. Thanks.
So that was, I had the same question as everybody else. I read it differently. We talked about it. I talked to Councilor Siddiqui about it. It was really trying to make sense of this. So, because I had that same question, that the RMDs that are already here and open, do they have to be on hold for 2 years if they or not? So you've clarified that, but I don't think it's that clear in the ordinance. So I think if you can work with that language. And I would just say that, obviously I'm glad to see this. I'm a little disappointed that, we're not going to reach the date that we're aiming for. We're seeing, Brookline just opened. We're seeing other cities that are, we've been talking about this a really long time. And I know we want it to be absolutely perfect, but there's going to be a lot of unknowns that we're going to have to see how they play out as we move forward. And I would like us to get moving on this. This is, again, as Councilor Kelly said, Cambridge voted at 80% or so for this, and other cities are flying past us on getting these shops open. And I would like us to, I wish we got this. I know everyone's busy. I wish we got this, 3 weeks ago or a month ago, where we could have, been moving along to having an ordinance committee meeting already. But I would really like to see this move as soon as possible and get this going. But we will have an ordinance committee to discuss that further. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just procedurally, we could move to a second reading and also have an ordinance committee hearing?
Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Zondervan, we could pass it to a second reading and also hold a hearing, but generally, to hold the hearing, it needs to be advertised 7 days before the hearing. So I'm assuming that you would want to have the hearing between tonight and when it comes up for ordination, which at this point is going to probably be 4/22.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So, it just gives us the possibility of passing it by April 22nd. Obviously, if we're not ready, we're not ready. So I would urge us to do that.
Pleasure of the council. Okay. I think if that helps move things along, I'd be in favor of that. So the question comes on referring to the ordinance committee and passing to a second. No.
Passing to a second reading and referring. Do it that way.
Do it that way. Okay. I'm going to switch those. Passing to a second reading and referring to the ordinance committee for a hearing. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to calendared items. There is one. So I guess I'll pull it. That a roundtable meeting be scheduled for Tuesday, April 9th at 5:30 p.m. in the Sullivan Chamber City Hall for the purpose of discussing the affordable housing overlay proposal. I filed this at the last meeting because I wanted to have the opportunity. We've had a number of housing committee meetings. There's a lot of public comment. There's a lot of presentation and not as much conversation amongst ourselves as to our thoughts about the overlay. So I thought a roundtable might be a good way to have one of those conversations or have some of those conversations. Now, since then, there have been other housing committee meetings scheduled. But again, those meetings, aren't the same as a roundtable. So I will open it up to anybody want to comment on this, or Councilor Simmons?
Thank you. Now that we have language before us, I think the roundtable would be very appropriate because it gives us an opportunity as colleagues and policymakers to sit with the document and talk through it. Certainly, to what degree possible, folks that now have the document before them can send their questions to CDD so that they can become prepared with the answers. But I think it'd be very helpful to have that roundtable.
Okay. Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur. I think it would be helpful to do that, so I'm in favor.
Okay. I just want to say one quick thing. I'm going to talk a little bit more when the policy order comes up. But, we heard from a couple people tonight that the proposal keeps changing. Well, that's what process is, everybody. We've heard a lot of feedback from people. CDD has gone back, taken that feedback into account, and they've made changes. If CDD hadn't made changes and they were continuing to present the same thing, I'm sure people would be saying, no one's listening to us, they're not making any changes. So this is what process looks like. It's messy, and people will come and comment and give their feedback, and then adjustments will be made, and we will eventually end up voting on something. So I just, for folks who are concerned that things are changing, that's a good thing that things are changing. It means people are listening and making changes. And so that's what process looks like. So I think a roundtable where we can have further discussions and see if there's anything else we want to, put into the mix would be a good thing. So I guess the question comes on, Councilor Carlin.
The word change can connote different things. It's being dramatically refined or less dramatically refined, and it's responding to our input. But please keep in mind, there's a whole section that isn't even included yet. And so it will be even more refined even after April 9th. I'm assuming it's going to take a good part, many months, to do what they still have to do on the design and the so-called form-based zoning. So these are the words we can focus on, but there's going to be a whole nother effort later on.
Yeah, none of this ever comes out the way it goes in, and that's, I think, a good thing. So the clerk just made a suggestion that in this, in the call of the roundtable, that we specify that we want to talk about the zoning language that was presented at the last Housing Committee meeting. I think that's fine, right? So the question comes on holding a roundtable on April 9th, 2019 at 5:30 in the Sullivan Chamber. It will be televised. The order calls for that, to discuss the zoning language presented at the Housing Committee meeting of, what was that?
April 28th.
28th. March 28th. Okay. All in favor say aye. As amended, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to applications and petitions. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 1, please.
Okay, and that is the one and only. An application was received from Gregory Matosian requesting permission for a curb cut at the premises numbered 14 Jackson Street. Said petition has received approval from Inspectional Services, Traffic, Parking, and Transportation, Historical Commission, and Public Works. Response has been received from the Neighborhood Association. The question comes on adopting the order. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought this was a very interesting application. It's actually an improvement over the previous conditions. What was also interesting is that the North Cambridge Stabilization Committee gave their blessings, but they gave 3 conditions, which I thought were very reasonable. And in particular, the last 2 were that the proponent work with the city arborist to basically get a back of the sidewalk tree once the construction is completed. And then the third and last condition was that they work with Eversource to have all the electrical service lines underground. So I thought these were great conditions, but we have no assurance that they will be met. And so what I would love to see is a commitment letter from the proponent that they will actually implement these two conditions. So my plan is to charter write this tonight and work with the proponents to see if we can accomplish that.
Before you do that, Counselor, the clerk might have some information.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Zondervan, those conditions would be put in the order if you so adopt the order based on the conditions cited. So they would be in the order, the curb cut order.
But we don't have a commitment from the proponent that they would actually meet those conditions.
They wouldn't get the curb cut if they didn't meet the conditions. That's their commitment.
Right, but the problem is they can't meet the conditions until after we've already approved the curb cut.
At the end of the day, I don't think waiting a week for you to work on this more is a big deal, but just I wanted to make sure you had that information.
Thanks.
So Councilor Zondervan exercised his charter right. We move to communications on a motion by Councilor Simmons to place communications 1 and 2 on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to resolutions on a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to bring the resolution list before us for discussion, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. I'd like to pull number 4, if I could. Anything else? Just, Councilor, Vice Mayor, the resolution on the death of Charles Webb. I'm going to ask for your consent to be a co-sponsor. I know his daughter very well and know the family, so I would like to be a co-sponsor on this. So on the resolution, Councilor Carlone.
Charles Webb was the first person to support the East Cambridge Riverfront Plan development back in the late 70s. He owned the old Irving and Kaysen building between 1st and 2nd, Otis and Thorndike. And he, beyond his being such a great guy and a good craftsman, he was very forward-thinking and extremely supportive. And so I just wanted to add to the Vice Mayor and yourself what a unique person he was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Carlone, I'm happy to add you as well. I didn't know him personally. I knew of him, but if you had a personal association and the mayor, the more the merrier. Or
He would
probably
have
not
liked,
the right term for a
if I
resolution,
could
but-
say, he would have liked you.
Oh, well, thanks.
And I know that we recently passed a policy order for his birthday, and he was very happy to receive that, and his family was moved by that. So I think they will be touched by this as well. So the amendment is to add myself and Councilor Carlone as co-sponsors on the resolution as amended, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy orders on a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring policy order and resolution list before us for discussion and adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 12, please.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Simmons. 3. Pleasure of the council. On the balance, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 3, that the city manager is requested to work with the appropriate departments to provide more information and analysis as it relates to the 100% affordable housing overlay district. Filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Zondervan, Councilor Carlone. I've been going to the main policymaker first. Vice Mayor, do you have comments, or would you yield to Councilor Simmons, who pulled the order?
Well, I was going to pull it myself, so I would like the opportunity just to frame why I submitted it. It is actually something that I did discuss with the city manager, so it's not a surprise to him and his staff that members of the council would like to have a little bit more analysis to inform how we make a pretty significant decision about land use. I would note that the council does not have our own land use attorney on our staff. We rely solely on the city solicitor and the staff at CDD. Sometimes that's fine, but other times we don't have the benefit of our own counsel to help us work through some pretty complex decisions and implications. So this is really just formalizes many of the questions that all of us have had and members of the public have had into requests to kind of help the staff, in a workflow. Some of the questions have been alluded to in the FAQ that was distributed before the last Housing Committee, but they weren't gone into in much detail. And so it's really just an effort to make sure that we have all of the range of information that we would need to make a sound decision. I know that there have been suggestions that there's great urgency and that we should not let the best be the enemy of the good in passing something, but personally, I don't feel that I understand well enough the zoning language that has been put before us to make an intelligent decision. I think even in trying to work through, I listened to the planning board's recent hearing about the accessory dwelling units, and they had an almost 2-hour discussion about what had started off to be fairly minor tweaks to a really short ordinance, and there were all of these big questions. And at one point, one of the members of the planning board jokingly said, "I think we need an assistant city manager for unintended consequences." So I just want to make very sure that all of us and that members of the public really know what we're looking at, because I personally wouldn't feel comfortable passing something, having an unintended consequence, and saying to whatever neighborhood or resident was living next to that unintended consequence, sorry, we'll go back and fix it later, because now we're trying to just go back and fix the accessory dwelling unit thing, and it's taken 2 meetings of the planning board, 2 meetings of the ordinance committee, and that's a very, very minor tweak. So I want to try to get this as close to right as we can and not have any surprises. So that's why I'm asking for information, and I hope that my colleagues will take this in the spirit in which is offered, which is responsible governance. Thank you.
Councilor Simmons?
Thank you. Through you to my colleagues, I certainly stand in support of you.
Councilor Simmons, can you, the mic?
I said I certainly stand in support of the policy order, and
I'm having trouble hearing you, that's all.
it's on though.
Huh? You got to talk right into it.
I certainly stand in support of the policy order. So I'm not standing in opposition. I just want to remind us as we move forward, we continue to move forward. I don't think I read it very thoroughly, and the points that were raised in the meeting, and I certainly, and I would never speak for my co-chair, but I can speak for myself, certainly want us to get as much information and get as informed as possible so we can make informed decision while we still move the conversation and the process forward. So in the spirit of getting more information and moving the process forward, I certainly stand in support of the order.
Pleasure.
I
to
yield the
council.
floor.
Thank you. Just a couple things, if I may. I support the order will support the order as well. But I do think also when we talk about so much of the discussion about the overlay and around the changes that might take place in the neighborhood, to me always sound like they focus on negative implications to the neighborhood. And we're not looking at what if we pass this, what is what's the benefit of socioeconomic and racial diversity in neighborhoods? Like, is that a good, I tend to think that's a good thing. Looking at, other benefits of doing this. And I just, I was talking to someone the other day who lives in a neighborhood that hasn't seen this type of change, and they're concerned about what adding, more density and more height to their neighborhood would mean for them. And I just want to share, I actually know what this is, because where I live on the corner of Pleasant and Franklin Street. And Franklin Street, from Pleasant to Soden, when I was growing up, was all 2 and 3 family homes. We played football in the street, yelled car every few minutes, all the things that you see. And then sometime in, I want to say the 90s, there was also JB Sachendor, which was a 1-story wood, whatever they did. And sometime those properties were sold, and what we have now are 2 6-story, very dense apartment buildings and an 8-story, very dense apartment buildings where those triple deckers were. And you know what's happened to our street? Nothing bad. The traffic hasn't gotten worse. Waze has caused more problems with traffic than more people on our street. Parking hasn't gotten worse. And believe it or not, some of the folks who live in those buildings are actually really nice. And they go to school with our kids, and when we're cutting down the grapes on our grapevine, they stop and ask about the history of the neighborhood. So I just, I've actually lived through it and can speak with personal experience that having some more density and more height in your neighborhood, I guess there's more shadows, but actually really enjoyed it on our street, and it's had a positive impact on our street. So I just put that out there. I'm not criticizing anybody. No one needs to come to anybody's defense. I'm just saying I've actually lived through it, and some of the folks who are worried about it, they haven't, because it hasn't happened in their neighborhood. So I'm sharing my experience that, it's not all bad. It's not all bad. Councilor Carlone.
Well, I actually agree with you, Mr. Mayor, on this issue. I think the problem is, given the length of this discussion, the only visual diagrams and drawings were shown were blank boxes. And that's not how you do it. You have to convey, use pictures. You convey good examples, as you alluded to, of how it can be done. And in some sites, it will be more important that the building be broken down to fit in, broken down in scale and character than other sites. The back of the buildings are just as important. If it's on Mass Avenue or Broadway, the back of the buildings are the critical thing, and they weren't even shown. So that's what will come out of form-based drawings that will help convey that and hopefully get rid of the fear. But that's where all the work is. It's not in the words to date, it's what's coming. And hopefully we can convey exactly what you've experienced.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd also like to add that there's a lot of goals that are assigned to this overlay, and we don't have the information to determine whether those goals would in fact be achieved. So when you say socioeconomic benefits or racial diversity benefits, we don't know that those benefits will actually happen until we do the analysis based on the information so that we can determine that. Similarly, spreading the construction out into the neighborhoods is assigned as a goal, but the economics of the situation may not lead to those apartment buildings being built, on your street the way they were in, back in that time as market rate developments, because the affordable housing developers naturally will continue to build where it is the most cost effective. And so, again, we need to do the analysis to determine, will this in fact have the impacts that we want it to have? I think it's absolutely in the spirit of continuing to move forward with the discussion so that we get the best outcome that we can. And now that we have a commitment to the funding, I think we can be confident that we will continue to develop affordable housing even as we continue to have this discussion.
Okay, if there's nothing further on adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 12, that the city manager go on record in enthusiastic support of H2865, an act to establish a net zero energy stretch code, filed by Councilor Zondervan, Vice Mayor Devereaux, and Councilor Carlone. Vice Mayor, can you take the chair for a moment, please? Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to briefly explain a little bit what this is about. The energy stretch code is part of our building codes, and Cambridge was one of the first, if not the first, municipality to adopt the stretch code, which allows us to have more stringent energy efficiency requirements in our building code. But over the years, the base code has caught up, and so the difference between the stretch code and the base code has shrunk. And so we're not seeing as much of an advantage from the stretch code as we used to. And we have an opportunity this year to improve the stretch code so that we can get even more energy efficiency out of it in our new construction and large renovations, and even to add net zero principles to it. And as you may know, we have adopted the Net Zero Action Plan in 2015. And one of the challenges that we have with that is that we cannot preempt the state building codes. And so having a stretch code that anticipates or even requires some of these net zero principles would make it even that much easier for us to advance our Net Zero Action Plan. So that's why I brought this forward, so that we can express our support to our state delegation and to the governor's office, and hopefully accelerate our net zero action plan, as well as improve the building codes for the entire state. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak? Okay, on placing the order on file, all in favor? Adopting and placing on file. Thank you. Okay. Okay, that's, I guess, the end of our policy orders. We would move to committee reports. Wait, we have no committee reports, right?
Councilor Kelly wants to move suspension of rules to introduce a late.
Okay. Well, okay, first I'll get rid of committee reports. There aren't any roundtable minutes. And I guess Councilor Kelly has something he'd like to share with us. The mayor is back, but we're going to move for suspension so that we can bring forward Councilor Kelly's, whatever it is, memo about, I'm not looking at it, so I'm just making it up. It's something about the accessory dwelling unit changes to language. So for suspension, all those in favor, say aye. I'm giving the chair back to the mayor.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You should all have a memo that has some suggested changes to the ADU amendment. It sort of reflects what we talked about earlier about stuff changing. One of the challenge in the process is how do you get the word ahead of time. So the ADU meeting is tomorrow afternoon, and you all should have a copy of the marked up proposal based on the planning board's comments and past ordinance committee comments, and the clean copy. And we can talk about it in greater detail tomorrow, but I didn't want anyone to be looking at it for the first time at our ordinance committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So the question comes on referring this to tomorrow's ordinance committee meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, Councilor Zondervan?
Would it be possible to get an electronic copy?
Councilor Kelly? Sure. On referral to the ordinance committee, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Any announcements? No. On a motion by Councilor Toomey to adjourn, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.